We currently live in the information age, and unless you've been living under a rock for about the last 25 years, uh, you are constantly barraged with information coming from all directions, emails, nonstop, social media, and it makes it very difficult sometimes to decipher what is the really good stuff and what is just bullshit that's out there in the ether. And my guest today has spent his entire career in understanding, learning, determining, testing, uh, continually following up with the empirical data, in particular as it relates to you, the individual, your metabolic typing, what you should be eating, what you should not be eating, what you should be drinking, what you should not be drinking, how to be at your optimum, be it if it's just for your overall health and or your sports performance. This is his second visit to the show, and I was very, very fortunate and lucky to have him on again. His name is Dr. Michael Hollis, and he is a board-certified and licensed naturopathic doctor that is sought out by people all around the country and all around the world. Athletes at the highest level, your hard chargers who, let's say, people who are working 40-plus hours a week, they're getting into the gym 10 to 15 hours, they're playing golf 3-4 times a week, or just if you're an average Joe and you're doing your career, you're spending time with your family, and maybe let's say you're only getting to play golf once or twice a week in a shortened, let's say, summer season if you're in a colder hemisphere. Regardless of what you are, optimum health is something that has become very skewed in today's world, especially in the country that we're in the United States, and that we have an obesity epidemic, even though we're supposedly eating healthy. So Doc Hollis sheds a lot of light on ways that he and his clients work through where they are, where they need to be, and then the path and the plan to cross that chasm or take that journey. As he says in today's show, what's very interesting is to answer something directly or just say, no, it's this or no, it's that, and those searching for one method as a cure-all, you're not going to find it in the show. That's not the way life works. That's not the way your health works. And as Doc wants to press upon so much throughout the show is everybody is different. There is no one diet plan, no one supplement, no one way to do anything that is going to make each individual the best that they can possibly be, the healthiest, give them the most energy. In particular, as we age and you start to have trouble sleeping, you start to have low energy, and as we all, the avoidance of chronic diseases, heart disease, cancers, and all those things that affect so many of us or our loved ones. So this is just an amazing show. Every time he comes on and every time I talk to him, it's just jaw-dropping. And I consider myself someone who stays very current, or pretty current at least, on what is happening in and around the healthing world, in particular as it relates to sports performance. So I think everyone is going to take a lot from this, whether, you're a tour pro, whether you're a hard charger, or whether you're just an average Joe. He sheds a lot of light on some topics that might just change your perspective, and they're definitely going to have some jaw-dropping effect on a lot of people out there. And I'll just give a little teaser. One of them has to do with water intake and the fallacy that you either have to drink 8 glasses of water a day or half your body weight in water. He just simply does not agree with. And I'll let you listen to what he has to say about that and a whole slew of other things on health, eating, diet, etc. So please give it up and give a big Golf 360 welcome to my friend and naturopathic doctor, Dr. Michael Hollis. What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Golf 360 podcast. I'm the host, Pete Popovich. So you may be asking yourself, what is Golf 360? And Golf 360 is a show that was designed to introduce you to people associated with the game of golf to help you improve not only at your game, but also your life. Almost all of our guests are from within the industry in some way, shape, or form, but some of the guests we have are from outside the industry, and it mainly revolves around the business world with a few others scattered in here and there. Now, all of the guests that we have a few things in common. One, they all were highly successful and accomplished in their field. Two, each has something to pass along that will help you in your game and your life. And three, they were all more than willing to give back by passing along the things that they use to help them in their career and even some of the mistakes that they made so that others don't make them in their journey. So I hope you find listening to them as enjoyable as I did interviewing them, and that each and every one of you benefits from the information that they so willingly and graciously pass along. Hey everybody, I want to give a big shout out to a new sponsor of the Golf 360 podcast, and that's Affinity Wealth Management Group. We all work exceptionally hard for our money, and none of us can afford to let that fall into the dark abyss of the big box financial service firms and their jack of all trades and master of none mantra, which basically means you become a number within a cookie cutter model that's also often accompanied by massive fees. Your future deserves more than average returns and little attention. At Affinity Wealth Management, they ensure that your financial goals receive highly individualized, tailored attention from experts, not just advisors, who are in the industry to be great and not average. As a client of Affinity Wealth, you receive a customized solution to your customized life, keeping in mind your family's financial situation, values, and risk tolerance. Call Affinity Wealth today for a no-cost consultation with one of their experts at 724-754-8200. Again, that's 724-754-8200. Or you can also check them out on the web at www.affinitywealthmg.com. That's AFFINITYWEALTHMG.com. This podcast is brought to you in part by Just Thrive Probiotic. You may be surprised to learn that your digestive system is the key to creating and maintaining the quality of your physical, mental, and emotional health, and it's one of the body's most essential systems. That's why the majority of nutritionists today highly recommend probiotics as an indispensable nutritional supplement. As a discriminating consumer, you've probably been searching for a probiotic that is proven, potent, and effective, and you found it. Just Thrive is your best choice for maintaining a healthy lifestyle. Just Thrive Probiotic captures the power of hundreds of thousands of years of nature's design with a specialized bacillus strain formulation that guarantees survivability through the stomach and upper digestive system. Supports optimum gut health, digestive health, immune health, and delivers antioxidants. Great for adults, kids, and the whole family. Use promo code GOLF360 at www.thriveprobiotic.com for 10% off your order. All right, we're live, rocking and rolling with Dr. Michael Hollis. Doc, thanks for making the time to come on again.
Hi, Pete. By the way, it's so hard for me to transition. Pete and I have been talking for about 15 minutes. It just makes me feel more honest when I say that when we start. But hi, hey Pete, how are you?
Right, exactly. And sometimes I've had some guests that we've gotten 30, 40 minutes sometimes, and I got to tell them, hey, hold that thought, because we just blew through a whole bunch of great stuff in a general conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And I tell people who haven't come on the show and I've reached out to, and maybe they have some concerns because, I mean, they know what podcasts are because they've become so popular, but they haven't done one. And I tell them, I said, look, this is not, there are no gotcha moments in this. You're doing me a favor coming on. I tried to get your information and you out to as many people as I possibly can. And there's no way, shape, or form I'm going to try to do anything to push the show over having somebody's something that they maybe said that they shouldn't have, or whatever. If they, and
well, I'm the king of that anyway. So I'm sure you guys will be hearing little interruptions throughout this thing where we had to cut out something. So, but you're a very easy guy to talk to. So likely less of those than maybe in other circumstances.
No problem. And one thing I butchered as we were talking before we came on, the last time you were on, and I think it was your title, and I had the wrong one. And I guess it would be technically you are a naturopathic doctor. Do I have that correct this time?
Yeah. Why, was that the endocrinology thing?
Yeah, I had put in the title or something. I put endocrinologist.
I'd love to have that on my title, but I can't because I'm not a technically quote unquote endocrinologist.
But in knowing you for a number of years and listening to you on other talks and things,
You go through a very similar, if not more, educational process than say would it be a family doctor or an endocrinologist? That can you, you're obviously you're the expert, so I'm just trying to clarify what's in my own head, which sometimes is difficult.
Well, in terms of, I mean, a person who gets into a job is going to do the things that they think about a lot. So, I mean, even if I was falling into the general practitioner category, if I was your family doctor, if I was like your general practitioner and I just took a huge interest in sports, then I might be more inclined to spend time talking about that with patients. So, and then there's the other side of the balance, which is if you're a doctor and you feel you really need to learn some things because you don't feel like what you were taught, it really covers the breadth and depth of what you want to understand about your patient, you might find yourself doing a lot of study after you're done work. And you might find that there are lots of discoveries to be made. And you might find over time that those discoveries will be filtered into your practice and might change the architecture of your interaction with people. The only downside of that is, and I think most general practitioners would, anybody who would be in that kind of job who's listening to this might say, yeah, but I can't do that because insurance says I can only do these things with my patients. And after that, if I want to discover more and do more labs, they'll have to pay out of pocket. And then it becomes a very, very difficult conversation with a patient who's like, yeah, I just have this insurance. What do you mean you want me to pay more? And so then it's like, I give up. I'll just talk to them about stuff. And whatever. And that's unfortunate because I imagine if there was a little bit more conversational or negotiating with patients, say, yeah, you know what? Between you and I, wouldn't you love to learn more about this? If you did, well, it'll cost you $300. The patient might just say, I'll pay it. I'm curious. Let's do it. And then, it could grow from there. But if it were that easy, I think it would be happening more often. So the long answer to your question is then you have guys like me who are, outside of that box and only charge cash and do it for a very good reason. And that is, I want to do what I want to do with you, patient. And the patient is, yeah, well, I know that because I got referred to you by somebody who's gone through the process and I want to experience that. And so here we're going to go and do all these different tests that you've never heard of. And if your GP looks at them, they'll be like, I don't even know where to start with this stuff because it's not it's not my bowl of soup.
Mm-hmm.
And, but you can learn a lot more about the way a person just walks on the planet rather than whether they're going to be, 2 months to live or not, which is what a lot of your standard labs are kind of designed to do is, yeah, there's a small portion of the labs that say, you're on your way to something, let's treat it early. But most of it is, geez, your numbers look bad. You better get on the table because we're going to have to operate, whatever. There's a whole other world that says, hey, well, why don't we just see how your body works? And, it's not going to tell us that you're living or dying. It's telling us that, how you're different from other people. And if we fed everybody the same food, 20 of those people out of those 60 people will use that food very differently than the remaining 40 people. Why is that? And where do you fit in that? And what can we do about it if it doesn't feel like it's working the way you want it to? And then you might be listening to this saying, well, why would I even care? Don't I poop out what I don't use? Like what? And the part of it is, let's say that you were a professional basketball player. You grew up in a household, your brothers and sisters were gifted. You were all just naturally gifted for running up and down the gym and throwing balls and hoops and stuff. And it was easy for you. And that's all great because it'll win you a scholarship and you go to that college you want, whether you want to continue to play basketball or want to get, a good education out of it is, another option that's available to you. That's all good. But here's the thing. There's going to become a point when, let's say you get in the NBA. around 25 or 26 is when all of your growth kind of starts to peak, and all of those great hormones and juices in your body that make you this amazing athlete start to ebb and drop. And then, you wanting another 12 years left for your career so you can, buy your mom a house and you're on your own island or whatever it is you want to do, you're going to start asking, well, why is it that I can't keep eating my, steak and potatoes every night? I lived on that stuff, and I played amazingly, and suddenly, my steak and potatoes aren't working for me anymore. And that has a lot to do with that other, 20 people that out of the 60 people, they got those very interesting numbers. And that's where changing things up for those people will really make a difference in helping them to maintain their health. And for that basketball to keep playing at a peak level without getting these, horrible injuries that seem to plague people after about 3 years of playing in the NBA, is to figure out, okay, well, how can we protect your body's ability to maintain its tissues as best we can with the tools that you have? You have the brain, you have the nervous system and the muscle memory to do all these things really, really well, but can your legs carry you through that anymore? And, how weak are your ligaments? You're never going to know until one of them snaps. But what we can do is say, well, hey, this report shows us that you're not very good at building collagen, and collagen is what makes those ligaments strong. So you're on your way. And it could happen tomorrow. It could happen 2 years from now. But let's see what we can do to feed this system so that that is not a weak area of you, supplying the means to regenerate and fulfill those tissues and make them healthy. And that's where those kinds of conversations become very important to certain people. Now, for other people, it's going to happen when you're 50 years old or 45 years old, and you've been in decline for easily 15 or 20 years, and now your knees are just, you can't get through 9 holes without having to take a Tylenol or whatever it is, whatever. And we need to figure out, with what you have left in that 45 or 50-year-old body of yours, what can we continue to repair, and what do we really need to work hard on? And let's do some testing to figure out where you stand compared to other people, so we're not missing something, or with the limited tools that we do have, we're not missing something obvious. And that's what testing is all about for us. And that's the long answer to your very brief question of what's your name and what's your title.
Well, yeah, that's a hell of an intro. That'll catch people's attention right away. You had explained one time, I think the last time you were on, and when you were on Dan's show, that you traditional, well, I guess if that, for lack of a better term, medicine or doctor would treat with prescriptions, medicine, scalpels, where you're treating more with the plate, meaning what you just described, what people are putting in their body, what they're absorbing, what they're able to utilize, what they're deficient in. Would you say maybe even go so far as to say exogenous versus endogenous? Like what do you need from outside, like a collagen that you mentioned, or creatine, supplementation, vitamins, things like that, that for whatever reason, genetic coding or pick a reason that individual's body doesn't absorb, produce, etc., and they're deficient in that, which will cause problems later on.
Yeah, that could be exogenous and endogenous, I guess. I would have trouble parsing that, because you could argue there are elements all over the place, but exogenous, I think the easiest exogenous we can say is, well, food putting in your mouth. That's you're putting stuff in there and then you're hopefully processing it, which not as easy as you think. Not as many people as you might think are endogenously processing properly, but they can still appear perfectly healthy. They can still operate perfectly well. No complaints, but so me as a practitioner, I deal with endogenous and exogenous. I deal with food. I deal with what happens on the inside of your body with that food. Once it disappears past your throat or whatever, very curious about that. Nutrients, very curious about those, because there's not a huge divide in terms of the fact that most Americans eat well enough to survive. There's no real debate there. The quality of the food, there is a lot of debate about the quality of food that we put into our little pie holes and make disappear. And there's some of it that's more like, I think a lot of people, when they have this conversation at the dinner table and somebody's talking about organic and another person is talking about, well, what difference is it really going to make? I think there's a lot of hype with a lot of the discussions that revolve around the types of food that we eat and their alleged benefits. And I'm pretty much on the dark side of every discussion when it comes to that. I like to be, I suppose I end up being very provocative because I wonder about the veracity of certain statements from certain groups of interested individuals about diet as to whether the information that they are drawing from is accurate in any way whatsoever. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of inaccurate information about some of the things that a lot of us hold very true in our lives. I mean, there are a lot of people who eat a certain way because they think it's healthier, when in fact, I mean, we're going to learn in 20 years whether they're right or wrong, but we don't know now. And, it could be discouraging to lay it out all on the table, but I think it's important to say, hey, if you're spending a lot of money on food and you have questions about whether it's making you healthier or not, it's really important to get your hands on, really good, valid data that says that it is, so that you're not spending money on something that you shouldn't be,
And that would be through testing, right?
Or
blood testing,
good studies,
right?
Good research. I mean, for me, everything comes from good or reasonable or attentive research. A data point in a research article that says this means this, we're pretty sure. We got good data to support that. Or this means this, and we tested it on like 3 people. Big deal, like 3 people. Like, how's that important? How's that relevant to anybody? But so like when you're talking about testing also relies on valid data. I remember doing a test for maldigestion, and I took me a year of using it religiously to then realize that the data that we got that validated the use of that test, it was on 2 people, and they were twins. Jeez. It was like just buried in the literature, and it just fit what we were looking for. And then it wasn't until a couple of years later we actually took a look at it and said, when the number of people being studied is 2 or 3, do we really feel like we can count on this data? And the answer was no. And so we stopped using it, So so it goes back to my original point is, you can talk about vegans better and, beef is bad for you and all this stuff. And you really need to join that conversation with some good, thoroughly applied data on thousands and thousands and thousands of people over a long, long period of time to see if you can pull out some trends that are meaningful to somebody who grew up in Texas and eats meat all the time. Because it's not really fair for you to just jump out into the media and say, well, vegan's better for these reasons. So this is us, I guess, our first foray into eating stuff. But there is value to saying that here are some data points that say that eating vegetarian is better for you for certain things than eating meat is. But most of my oversight in these areas is it's not a permanent thing. It's more like a preparation thing. So a lot of the advice that I'll give to my athletes is, and I had this conversation with somebody about a couple of weeks ago in depth, because he happened to be very curious about it. I would say, hey, I know what it's like to be on the road, and I know what it's like for game day. You have your game at whatever time during the day, and you don't get back to you don't have your shoelaces tied up and your jeans on and you're out the door and back to normal life until well after dinner time. How do I manage that? I'm getting on a plane or I'm going back to a hotel, and by the time I get everything sorted out, it's like 10 o'clock at night, and that's my dinner. How do I do that? How do I do my pre-game and my practice prep and stuff like that? And the overall is, we know that if you eat lots of animal protein, that there are animal-based peptides. Those are like little pieces of the protein that you're eating when you eat beef or lamb or whatever it is you eat. There are chemicals in there that once they get absorbed into your body, and some of them do when you eat, they will have an effect. They will communicate with your blood system, and then will cause changes. And if you were to ask me, well, is it good or bad for me when I'm playing a game, when I'm, on the court, I would say probably not as good. So you might want to consider not eating animal protein as a preparation for your activity. And then save it until you're done. And they would say, well, you mean, at 10 o'clock? And I'm like, well, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but if it's the only meal you're going to get and it's 10 o'clock, then that's the only meal you're going to get. And that, so long as you don't feel like you can't go to sleep when you're done eating, then that's the way it is. But I would say if you're going to do preparation and you're going to eat some protein during the midday, an hour or 2 hours before you're playing, I would say maybe make sure it comes from a vegetable source, that protein. And the interesting thing is, it's a flip side, or it's neutral. I don't know if it goes, if the pendulum swings all the way to it actually opens up your blood system, or if it's just the pendulum goes back to the middle point, and that's your natural state is you just have better circulation. But eating a vegetarian protein source will help to improve for a period of time the openness of your blood vessels, opens everything up, lets blood flow more freely. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not a pro athlete, if you go in the 15 minutes before you and I got on record button here, we were talking about like, let's mention things for people who are more intensive. Let's mention things for people who are not like pro players, but still are pretty active. And let's mention things for people who just like to play golf. And so mentioning something for people who are in the middle of that, which is more like, I'm, working a normal 9 to 5, but I still go work out 12 hours a week. Mm-hmm. I would say, well, if you go and work out after you're done at work, if you have more discipline than I do, and you can actually leave work tired and run down and actually go to the gym and work out, I would say then the protein bar or whatever it is that you decide to eat 2 or 3 hours before you leave work, make sure it's vegetable-based protein, like pea protein or rice protein or something, or soy-based protein, which again, I'm not against, unless, some guy is growing boobies and doesn't want to grow bigger boobies, then that's another area we would talk about. But the point being that you might find that if you're used to eating something that's meat-based, like, beef jerky or something like that as your protein before you go work out, you might find if you do the treadmill or you do your spin class, you just might find that the dial's a little higher and you feel the same way that you did a couple of days before when you ate a lot of meat protein before. And if you notice that, then you can probably say, yeah, those little peptides that we find in meat, well, I'm pretty sensitive to them, and it closes up my blood vessels. And I find that I'm more gaspy, I'm reaching more for air, and I feel like I'm leaden-legged when I do my spin class. Whereas this time when I, just ate the vegetarian protein, I felt pretty good. I mean, leaden-legged a bit. I mean, that's part of doing a spin class, but I felt like I was keeping up and I was doing okay. So, and you might find other guys that don't get affected by it and they have no complaints. But there is enough speculative literature out there that is suggesting that there are these things that you find in red meat, and they're trying to assign them to heart disease. A lot of this research is trying to connect them to heart disease. And between you and I and all the people that are listening, I've seen the research, and I'm really disturbed by what they say in their reports, because it seems to lean towards, hey, we found these things and they might be atherogenic, which means that they might be contributing to cardiovascular disease. And then you look at the data and
cancer
it's
as
like,
well, right? Heart disease and
yeah,
cancer.
yeah. But the thing is, the data, I could be wrong. Please, let's start with just I could be wrong. But when I look at the data, I'm like, where are you getting this from? Because I don't see it in the data. I can see in the data that maybe there is a very small bump in the probabilities of, like, we're talking about lottery winners likelihood situation here. And hey, we're not playing like the millions lottery. Maybe we're playing the $100 lottery. Okay, so 1 in 200's chance of a change in the way things work that you might be more susceptible. And to me, like, as a guy who plays the odds, I would say that's not enough for me to warrant giving up on eating a steak when I want to eat a steak. It's more like well, maybe, I'm whatever years old, I'm getting older. I know that I need to do certain things, and I will do those for sure, but I'm still going to eat some meat, because it's not probable enough that I'm going to be concerned about it. Those are the data points that are coming up. But hey, if I saw data points that were like, you're gonna probably, out of 20 people, 5 of those people are likely going to have a fatal heart attack before they're 70. I'm like, okay, let's find Pete and get the record button going and just put that message out there. Then I would say, don't eat whatever. Fingernails. Don't eat fingernails. They're way up goes the cardiovascular risk. Why bother?
Well, because there's so many variables involved in that stuff, at least. And let me back up and preface what I'm about to say with this. Is so I have many years ago I did martial arts, I did jiu-jitsu, I did karate, and when you got to black belt, the general populace thinks that black belt is this, that you're the
deadly assassin.
You're deadly, yeah. But when you're in that field, that discipline, all that means is now that's a green light for the higher, like 5, 6, 7th degree black belt to really just beat on you, because you're good enough that you should know how you know how to block, you know how to carry yourself, you know how to do the moves and whatever you're going to do.
You can take a heavy hit now.
Yes, and now if you don't protect yourself, they're not going to break a rib, or they, most wouldn't, but they have free range now to hit you. And why I preface this statement with that is, you and I have had enough conversations, I've had enough with Dan and other Czech people, Charles Poliquin guys, Preston Green, that I know enough to be dangerous, and I know more than the general population. But when I talk to people who are experts like you guys, it's like, yeah, I'm not even scratching the surface. But what I'm getting at is, if you take meat, for example, I mean, there's so many variations in okay, is it grass-fed versus grain-fed? Did they eat it every day? Were they eating more than 3 to 4 ounces at a sitting? And to your point earlier, where someone comes out with a study and says, okay, well, our study was conclusive, but we did it on 2 twins, and and this is very interesting that you brought that up, because I was listening to Dr. Peter Attia, who is the world-renowned oncologist and oncology surgeon from Johns Hopkins, and then he started the longevity clinic. He has one out in your area, out in L.A., and then one in New York. But he I'm on his email list, and he sent one last week that was describing, is breakfast good for you or bad for you? And in one study out of a university, I'm not going to throw them under the bus, said that, and I might have this a little bit off, but something to the effect of it, if you don't eat breakfast, then your chances of getting cancer increase by over 60%. So his longevity clinic goes back and they dissect studies. How were they done? Were they done correctly? Et cetera, et cetera. Like, aspartame was one they studied, that they said, unless you're taking copious amounts of aspartame, it's not going to be that bad for you. If you have one Diet Coke a week, you're not going to fall prey to some disease. But but this study is an example, and once he tore it down and looked at it and read it, he's like, no, this is not correct. This is not how you do conclusive studies. Yet it's out there in the ether, and people are reading it and saying, you go to a local gym and there's a nutritionist and says, well, if you intermittent fast, you're going to run a higher risk of cancer. When the literature talking to you now says no, that's contrary. If you do fast, you get a whole bunch of benefits from it.
Yeah.
Autophagy, to name one, and on and on and on. You give your digestive system a break. The body starts pruning things, so to speak, that cells that it doesn't have to feed anymore, and therein is where it helps with cancer removal, or a predisposition not to have cancer, or the likelihood of getting cancer is not as high, or any serious degenerative disease. So it's to elaborate on your point, for someone to blanket statement say, well, steak's not good for you, or red meat's not good for you. Another case in point would be the documentary Forks Over Knives. I don't know if you saw that one. That's a few years old now. But once I think they dug into the literature, and I think the study was done in China. They studied for, I think it was 4 decades, something like that. It was a substantial study, what most people would say, wow, that's really in depth. But I think once the critics got a hold of it and peer reviewed wanted to take a look at it, what they found out was the biggest glaring point was, well, they didn't differentiate between grass-fed steak and grain-fed, which has large discrepancies, right? The CLA content of grass-fed is much better. Evidently, when you eat meats, and red meat in particular, you should have it with some sort of green vegetable to counteract the chemical response. And you would know much more about that than I do. Like I said, I'm just touching the surface when I talk to someone like you. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's so many variables and they try to lump it into a study, and then it gets out there and somebody grabs it and it just spreads, and it's like, oh God, it got to make your life very difficult at times.
Well, I say no more than I say yes. So the interpretation on that is, whenever somebody comes to me with a discussion like, I certainly eat vegetarian, I wouldn't touch, I know that they're assuming that because I am an alternative naturopathic physician that I'm going to agree with that, and I don't. I think that, and this is where all this conversation goes back to the foundation of what we're talking about is, it's all individualized. I mean, everybody's a little bit different. Everybody's conditioned on their genetics. Everybody's conditioned by their environment, which means most patients don't come to see me until they're in their probably 20s, 30s, 40s. The damage has been done a long time ago. Whatever that damage may be, that might have affected the way that they compared to every other normal person on the planet. Everybody's got something that has been ignored, that is detrimental to their health, that has been ignored for a long time, and it won't show symptoms until it's degraded, whatever that is, until it's degraded to a point where it is essentially non-functional. And when I say non-functional, I mean, it's not like you're coming to me when your liver is failed completely, but you're coming to me when your liver's reorganized itself so much to try and figure out how to deal with all the crap that's in your body, that it has maybe 20% of its capacity left to do daily routine stuff. And things start to peel out, like it starts to show up in your skin, starts to show up in your metabolism, and then it starts to show up in a lab. Individualized stuff will dictate diet. So when somebody comes to me at this is going to go back to personal experience, at a public gathering, and is talking at a very high pitch about, a certain way of eating, and basically this is, somebody who has no experience in diet, nutrition, medicine, whatever, is just talking about his or her personal experience with diet, and is trying to educate everybody around her. My obligation in a situation like that is to say, well, everybody's a little bit different. And, somebody who's passionate about whatever their chosen dietary preference is not going to take that very well. And lesson learned. I mean, it's an internal debate. You keep your mouth shut and just whatever. You talk to people privately. You say, oh, well, you might be a little bit different. Or you just, chime in and say, well, everybody's a little bit different. you never know how somebody who's really passionate about their point of view is going to take that. And of course, sometimes it doesn't go over very well.
Well, I think that's
But
happening in every industry. I mean, you can take the golf coaching industry, which
yeah,
I'm in largely, and for years, let's say the last 15 years or so, the ability to measure what's happening in the golf swing via launch monitors, uh, feedback, where the pressure is in the ground, where your body's turning, where your wrist angles are throughout the entire swing with the advancements in technology and everything else. And in the early stages of that, there were a number of my colleagues that said this is going to be revolutionary, it's game changing, and maybe to some point it has. But what they're finding out, and I've had a number of the doctors who do the research with these things and help these companies develop these products, is what they're finding out is what everybody knew from step one, is that everybody is slightly different, and it's not the blanket that everyone is looking for, I think, in every industry, that is going to say, if you do this, you will be, it's the end all that's going to cure everything, whether it's your golf swing, your health, pick
if
a
you do
field.
this, you'll be better
Yes.
somehow. Yeah.
And maybe in incremental things, and some people might have had big jumps because they were so off, like you said, if they've been eating very poorly for 25 to 35 years and their liver is in bad shape and they're down to 20% capacity, yeah, what you do is going to make a huge improvement to get it to 50%, let's say. I mean, it's more than double. And if somebody tweaks their swing in a certain way, yes, it's going to get them from a 10 handicap to a 3 handicap. But to take somebody that's got 20% and say, I'm going to get you to 100, or take somebody's golf swing and say, you're going to go from barely winning the C flight in your club championship to playing the PGA Tour. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. And by laying a template on it,
Mm-hmm. And but so
I mean,
they're finding out everybody's different. It's like, how does the formula
put you in the
change?
machine and just it'll make it all better. It doesn't.
And then in talking to you enough and knowing my industry and understanding the health side more every time we connect, is that recipe for improvement, be it your health or your sport, changes as you change, whether it's age or whether it's getting your body back into what, first having an understanding of what health is, because most people are so skewed, it's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And then getting healthy, and then how does your body adapt to that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
then there, you know what? Then there are the times where I ignore somebody because there's not enough data, and 10 years later I realize, holy cow. And I only say that because, I don't want to be, scuffing my foot on all of the on innovation. And there are a lot of really interesting ideas out there. It's just, you really have to sort through them because there's a lot of baddies and not as many goodies. But there are times when probiotics was a big thing that I had a lot of skepticism about. And my skepticism wasn't that there's something in this, but my skepticism was people were explaining this will do this for this reason, when that reason had not been in any way suggested by research or any kind of data. And I was, in that regard, I was right. I was right to say I'm skeptical. But here's the thing. Those people who said that for this reason, even though that reason was wrong, it does do that thing for different reasons that we have now discovered. So it has opened the door for more prolific use of certain strains of probiotics, which is great, but not for the reasons that we originally thought, which educates our use of specific types of probiotics in more productive ways for more individualized needs. And now I have different types of probiotics on my shelf that I select based on what I hear, what I see, and the impression that I'm getting from the data that my patients provide me from their labs. So that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. I might just be pulling from a very, very uninteresting pool of ideas here, but that's an area that has really had a lot of intensive interest by the general public and by practitioners. And I think it's driven a lot of research that has helped us better understand the application, which is good. And we're still not even there yet. We're years away from making full utility of it, because I know that there are still undiscovered reasons to use it.
Let's talk a little bit about some breakdown as far as diet, because let's kind of lay a groundwork, so to speak, for so that there's a general understanding of what a I don't even know if you can call it good, and at least better. And if you take the average American diet, almost anything would be better.
Yeah, pretty much. That's true. We eat pretty badly,
especially once you get to other countries.
Food.
You go to other countries and you see how much better the food is, and how they eat. The amounts is at least half. Everything here supersized. But you do have, right? You have your proteins, your carbs, and your fats.
Well, it's interesting. Some of the poorest countries eat the best, because they can only eat what they grow. So that part of the traveling around the world kind of comment that you made is, it's better for those reasons. But it's also worse in a lot of poor countries that are fed by other countries. Like, I don't want to say Africa because it's not fair, but I know that there are countries, and I remember this because I had some interaction with somebody who is African who moved to the United States and was trying to provide his government with the means to re-educate the eating habits of his people, his fellow countrymen. I can't remember. It was a long time ago, the exact country. But the whole idea is we are mainly fed because of the environment, both political and climate, because of the climate and the political situation in our country. There's very little agriculture, and there are a lot of people who will starve. And, other countries, including the United States, were very generous in providing them with drops so they, fly by or ship and drop in these boxes full of rice. And that was their way of saying, well, this is what we can give you. Here's some help. And now what they're finding is, and I'm not going to talk about the economics and the political side of it, but I'll say that diabetes is an epidemic in his country. It was an epidemic in his country at the time that he approached our clinic and we were talking. And his view was that there were some plants that grew inherent to his country that he thought he'd like to, encourage the political environment to grow more because they were anti-diabetic. And I always thought, well, why don't you just stop feeding these people rice and find other ways to feed these people, because that's what's causing the diabetes in the first place. The generosity of other countries is creating these problems, and there's just it was a really interesting conversation. But ultimately, I was like, yeah, you can give them the plant equivalent to metformin or a drug, but ultimately the drug, even in the United States where we use it the most, is just a coping mechanism for people who just refuse to change their diet because they're not being properly educated by the system that they are being treated with. And, for us, it's, fast food and soda with sugar in it and all these other things that are the cheapest foods that we can afford to buy. Some of us can afford to buy. And they are the foods that are also the easiest to consume. They don't require cooking. You just pop the cap and glug, glug, glug. There you go. Sugar, pure diabetes. So,
if no one's ever looked at a can of soda and pick your brand, it's 35 to 50 grams of sugar in one can.
And especially nowadays, I'm talking about 2020, you can buy for the same price the diet version. I know that it sounds absurd for a guy like me who's supposed to be an alternative naturopathic, whatever. Look, it's a bargain process. You get food into people that will satisfy them and make them happy so that they can get on with their life without eating something that's going to kill them. Mm-hmm. If it comes down to negotiating between a Diet Cola and a cola, it's like, It's the same 10 cents per gallon or whatever. Just go get the thing. And the only argument you're going to get is if somebody says, but I can't, those are calories that I need because I can't afford to get my calories from anywhere else. And that is not fair. That is not a fair thing to say. It is, those are the only easy calories you can get that you don't have to put in a microwave and you don't have to prepare. And that's really has more to do with, are you making good use of your time? Because you should really learn how to cook. Then you can buy that bag of beans over there and you can feed yourself for a week for less than $1. I guarantee you. And so it comes down to, properly educating people. And to your point, properly educating people about what to eat. The typical North American diet is not the typical North American diet is good for you if it stands on the legs that it was built upon. It can be good for you. But it's gone through massive interpretation by normal folk like us to suit our conveniences. And suddenly your vegetable portion becomes a fruit portion. A decade later, your fruit portions become a sip of a latte instead of a coffee. And then a decade later, it just becomes full on opening a can of Coke and guzzling it before you run out to work. And the translation process has been provoked in so many ways by the public influence that has gobbled us up over the last 3 or 4 decades through TV, magazine ads, radio, internet. It has, foods are not sold for your health. They're sold to whet your appetite. And the great thing about American foods is they're packaged and they're pretty clean compared to packaged foods in maybe other not as advanced nations. Even though we hear on the news about, salmonella in this and, the buybacks for that food that the grocery store found out was infected, blah, blah, blah. Certainly there are these stories, but ultimately, the foods that you get, frozen foods and the foods that you open in a can, foods that you throw in the microwave, they are made easy. And we know they are made easy because we grew up with commercials about pizza pops and, chunky soups and all these different things that come from boxes instead
TV
of
dinners and
and then the worst way to educate somebody who's susceptible is to send them to college because they go to a room and they have a microwave. They don't have a kitchen. They have a closet, a dirty clothes hamper, a dresser, and a microwave. And so in addition to all of the food socializing they had when they were growing up as adolescents, they're being further socialized by a microwave. And then their food selection is tailored to what's available to them. And by the time they get out of school and they're into the real world, they've never learned how to wash a dish yet. Or they've never learned how to, turn an oven on, and then we get educated by, whatever's convenient. And then that's unfortunately where our North American diet comes from. So what you're basically asking is, okay, if we can separate ourselves from that and we can turn an oven on and take a little responsibility, are we eating a high carb diet, low fat diet? Are we eating a high protein, a low protein diet? Where do we start? And the way we start is, I'm sorry, but it's individualized. You have people who are perfectly capable of eating 200 grams of protein every day, and whatever else they eat on top of that completes their diet. And they're off and they're shooting their hoops and they're running up and down the walls and they're doing great. And for the guy that they play basketball with, it's plant-based protein less than 90 grams a day, and the rest is fiber and complex carbohydrates. And then the question becomes, well, how do we distinguish from one to another? You distinguish that by looking at the systems in their body and seeing how they handle protein, seeing how they handle carbohydrate, and seeing how they handle fat. People who come to the clinic having eaten for most of their lives the way that they they are either appropriated by what they've learned, or they are appropriated by convenience. They'll show up with whatever problems assimilating, digesting, or making good use of certain calories, whether they be fat. You have guys who cannot digest fat, and it'll come up in conversation. The way that they digest food shows that the fat is the part that they're having a big struggle with. But some people is protein. Some people eat a steak and they're done. They can't even get up off the chair at the meal table. They just want to take a nap, or they feel horrible. They get gut pains or whatever. So clearly, then we have concerns about protein. It may just be red meat, but nonetheless, we're starting with concerns about protein. So, and then carbohydrate, the equation's simple. If you have a propensity for diabetes or obesity, carbohydrate is not going to suit you well until you can make drastic changes in your lifestyle, or make drastic changes in the selection of carbohydrates that you choose to put on your meal table. And that's very difficult. People will tell you they'll do it, and people will go home and forget.
Well, they conveniently.
Yeah, or somebody else is involved in their meal process. They may have kids, and then they realize how much of a headache it is trying to get the kids to eat broccoli. And then just like, look, there's got to be a meeting point here, because, I'm preparing. My time in the kitchen is preparing meals for my kids, or whatever the case may be. My mother's in a home, and or my mother, is old, and she needs care, and I'm that care. So I have to prepare meals for her, and she won't even eat if I don't do whatever. So who knows? There are many spectrums to this family element that, will surprise you if you don't ask. And it'll be the reason why they come back 3 weeks later and, kind of roll their eyes when you ask them about diet. It's like, you don't understand. Yeah, I probably do. So let's change it so that you can figure it out. And let's maybe change it so you can make your mom happy, or whatever. And then it becomes a negotiating process. But maybe that just is accepting. It'll never be a performance gain for you to make a radical change to diet, because those radical changes are just eating a bowl of oatmeal instead of a bowl of Fruit Loops, and that's the best you could do. And it's going to do some good for you, but it won't change your life, But so it's a very difficult question to answer straight up. It's not like just saying, I heard about, this guy talking about eating vegan, and everybody's talking about it. It must be great. I'm sure it's great, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's great for everybody. You have people who just have a really miserable time trying to digest certain essential forms of vegan food things. They just are miserable, and they feel like they're dragging their feet all day. For that person, you're not going to want to, unless you can figure out why they're having trouble and correct it. And for some people, there is no correction. It's just the way that their body's built, because they've been living on this planet for 40 years, eating cereal in the morning and cow's milk and steak and butter. And that's how they grew up. And, you really have to take that into account. Your flexibility of moving one thing around is delimited to maybe swapping out a steak for chicken breast, and, small increments, and then waiting a while for the body to adjust to see if you can make more small increment.
I think it's taken me 2 years to where you and I share the vice of enjoying baked goods. And I think we've talked about that a number of times. Yeah. And I have, once we started working, I relegated myself to, okay, if I'm going to, because I associate it a lot with fun times, right? Birthday parties, family get-togethers, Christmas, a lot of mental.
Yeah, and your mom's
things.
A great cook, and she
yes.
loves to bake, and that is part of your DNA.
Yes. So,
there's love attached to that.
Okay, I've got to cut it. So, like, having a cookie or two at dinner in the middle of the week, no more. But like, my niece's birthday, or my mom comes down, and she doesn't do it as much anymore unless I push her, say, you're going to make this. But it took me a while to get myself to accept that, okay, I can do it, but I have to siphon it off. Otherwise, I've gotten to a point, and I was telling Eileen this the other day, that I don't even have to have Doc scold me anymore that I've had this, because I don't feel good if I eat it. I can have maybe a bite or a small piece and I'm okay. But if I take that extra step, then okay, I have to accept I'm going to feel not very good for an hour. And if I have even more, okay, it might be a day, because I can definitely feel it the next day if I have too much. And I tell you what's interesting is going out of town for the weekend and talking about the American diet and the difficulty in eating, as far as, for me, what would be considered healthy. It's very difficult not to have a carb overloaded diet in our society in today's world, and or the protein options are extremely heavily laden with salt, sodium. Right. So your meat choices in the morning, for the most part, and pick any average everyday USA town: bacon, sausage, links or patties, both heavily processed meats laden with sodium to effectively keep the freshness, right? Preservatives. Or you got eggs, which is arguably a very healthy protein choice. And then your options after that are potatoes, grits, oatmeal, cream of wheat, cereal. I mean, it's like the list is endless of carbohydrates. It's like, no wonder
pancakes.
We have pancakes, waffles, right? And then, okay, let's top it with, here's your options: fruit and syrup. We're going to lather it with and whipped cream. And it's not homemade whipped cream. It's not real cream that's whipped. It's sugar laden whipped cream. So it's like, how do you maybe again, after going through a 2-year being evolved over that time and learning these things, and then going through that changeover, it's very difficult to go somewhere and say, okay, I can go eat breakfast. So again, I've relegated myself to, all right, if I'm going to leave town a few times a year, if I have a French toast for breakfast, I don't mentally beat myself up, or I don't just not eat for a day, because there's not a lot of healthy for me options. It's like, to pick your poison. You want the protein with this overabundance of salt, or do you want the carbohydrates with the sugar and the syrup? It's not a very healthy option to have.
Yeah, I'd recommend the protein with the salt over the. I mean, if anybody's going to take something away from this conversation, they're going to be like, okay, well, what do I do? I take the protein with the salt, simply because I think it in the long run, your body can figure some things out with the protein, whereas it really perpetuates a lot of the, American health related issues to go with the carb side of it. So,
as far as the carb side, because we had a discussion not too long ago about, so let's do the differentiation between, you have your average everyday Susie or Joe who does their 9 to 5. Maybe they walk a mile or two in the morning or when they get home from work, and that's the extent of their physical activity. Then you have maybe your hard charger who's 40 hours a week, and then they're going to the gym 10 to 15 hours a week, and they're playing sports. Let's say they play golf 18 holes twice a week. And then you have your professional athlete, or people aspiring to be professional athletes. One thing that you mentioned to me, because as I was getting back in more of the hard charging, getting more into the athletic stuff again, not to pursue professional sports again, but being very active, and the use of carbohydrates, that I was very surprised to learn that things like a sweet potato or potato, that your body doesn't really have a full comprehension of the difference in the glycogen between that or a Snickers bar. Is that safe to say, or am I off base on that?
My view of potatoes, whether they're sweet or yummy or otherwise, are their sugar by the time they hit your stomach.
And the body doesn't differentiate in sugar, does it?
It doesn't once it gets past your mouth. And it is, while it is not entirely true, anybody could argue me as to the accuracy of that comment. I'm just saying that ultimately the amount of time it takes for the sugar that lies within the potato to get into your bloodstream is it's close enough that it is about on par with sugar. So if you ate I don't know, 3 teaspoons of sugar or whatever, or however the equivalent is, and just, the only difference might be that the degree to which your nervous system can acknowledge the sweetness through your tongue can initiate insulin production maybe faster than the potato because it's not as sweet hitting your tongue. So there may be some disparity there, but to me, it's such a small relative difference that you're essentially eating sugar when you're eating potato. So, if somebody says, "Oh, I have to worry about that, I don't have a sweet tooth," inevitably the conversation when we get into diet stuff reveals itself as, well, I compensate for my sugars by eating equivalent starches. And while it's probably better to do that, it's not enough of a difference that in 20 years you're going to be that much further apart than somebody who's gaining weight and having trouble losing it and getting blood sugar issues that are pre-diabetic or diabetic. And I think that is part of the misnomer that is encouraging people to continue to eat in a way that is perpetuating our diabetic tendency in this culture, because we're not actively differentiating between, or we are, no, maybe the answer that's wrong. Maybe we are trying to differentiate between eating sugar and cereals and donuts and stuff like that. And we're trying to differentiate that from eating potatoes and bread and Cheerios or cornflakes or whatever, which is considered a non-sweetened form of cereal, when in fact they are so close together that it's really not worth separating the two out. So, it's not just a gluten-free issue. It's, just not eating as many carbohydrates. You have to respect the capacity of your body to use what you put in it. And if you're putting something in your body that your body cannot fully use, it will store, or it will find creative ways to get rid of that are inevitably unhealthy for you.
If somebody who out there listens and they're playing, let's say they're going to play a 3-day golf tournament, how do they, unless they've been eating a lot of vegetables, a lot of clean protein for a consistent time, their body hasn't made that adaptation to burning fat instead of carbohydrates for energy. How does, or even if someone thinks let's say they're not eating the Fruit Loops for breakfast and they don't eat candy bars and they don't really, and maybe they have a potato or two a week, maybe a piece of toast in the morning, but they're not heavy on the starches.
So you're saying you got a guy who's going to play a lot of golf, who's used to eating a certain way, and then we put him on a low carb. Is he going to collapse?
Right. How does he get through the tournament? Because he's going to be out there for 5-6 hours at a time a day.
Well, maybe do it when you're not doing a 3-day tournament, and then play with it. I mean, golf is more forgiving because there are days when you're competing and there are days where you're just walking around practicing.
Mm-hmm.
You can afford to feel like crap when you're practicing, if that is the case. If you're going to say, well, I want to make a change to improve my performance long term, and I'm willing to feel like crap for a couple of days while my body figures itself out. And that's just generally what happens is if you switch over the diet, you try and pick a time when it's convenient for everybody to go through a process. And unfortunately, there are some people who never seem to come out of it. They just they feel lower energy and they can't seem to reach that end point where your body has finally flipped over and started burning fat efficiently. And that can be the case for a lot of different reasons. One is if somebody's pre-diabetic, which you can pick. You can look to the guy to your right and the guy to your left. One of them is probably going to be pre-diabetic. So, there's enough people out there that when you put them on a low-carb diet, because they have derangements in the way that they respond to sugar that are partly due to dysfunction that is pretty well so far gone that it is going to take a lot of effort to recover, then those systems may not match up very well with somebody who doesn't put on a lot of who takes carbohydrate out of the diet for a little while, and they just can't seem to get all the machinery working in their body to switch over to burning fat. And that could be due to hormonal stuff. You got people with thyroid disorders, thyroid resistance. You have people with, low testosterone or testosterone resistance. You have people obviously with lower high insulin or insulin resistance. Those are all hormones that play a big part in either facilitating the activity of insulin, facilitating the flow and use of both fat and carbohydrate. And some of them have a big role to play in switching the machines over to burning fat instead of carbohydrate. And if those are missing, then the transition is going to be very painful and unpleasant for somebody who may just need to be patient for a month or two and just slowly work through it. But like you said, if it's somebody who needs to be on the court 2 or 3 days out of the week, that process is going to have to wait until off season if there's an off season, or that process is probably not going to be looked upon very well until something can be done about getting machinery to switch over a little bit faster, and that might involve some kind of intervention,
So if somebody is a hard charger and they're getting in the gym and once or twice a week that they're doing a pretty vigorous workout, would their diet consist of eating more protein as a post-workout recovery to redevelop the damaged tissue that they just did, as well as vegetables? And would their carbohydrate be a lentil, like some sort of beans, or at that time is it okay for the glycogen refill, so to speak, to have a handful of, or a half a potato, or a nest of the pasta instead of half a plate, or is that frowned upon?
Well, that depends on the activity. I mean, if you're playing golf and most of your activity is at a lower intensity, and I'm not sort of disrespecting the types of work and the hard work that people do, but the level of activity is not as intensive as somebody who might be doing powerlifting. It's a different type of exercise. Having glycogen stores for golf isn't as helpful as it is having fat stores that are burnable, because when you're walking, it doesn't matter that you're swinging periodically too. When you're walking and more casually, really the concern about golf is your posture and standing for long periods of time, or standing and walking for long periods of time. And that requires a different type of maintenance than somebody who's playing soccer or basketball or football, because there are periods of major intensity, and there's also more of a tendency to get shock injuries, whereas in golf it's more overuse injuries. So that we're in different on different islands talking about diet when we're comparing different types of athletic professions. So for golfers, it's slow wear and tear. It's the effect of insufficient circulation on joints that are weight bearing, because if you don't have good circulation through the muscles and tendons and joints that support, like your lower back, the mid back, which kind of supports the torque of your swing, your hips and things like that, what'll happen eventually is, because you're on your feet so many hours of the day and you're standing, torquing and twisting and applying pressure to these areas that are, your 50-year-old body it doesn't have good circulation. What happens is the continuous compression on the joints without sufficient circulation to kind of move oxygen, move nutrients in, move refuse of metabolic activity out. What happens is it changes the constitution within that joint that's under pressure and causes it to degenerate. And if you don't give ample time to heal that by alleviating that slow positional postural pressure that you're putting on it, eventually you'll be going through active degenerative processes through the day that you're doing the activity, and your sleep at night won't be enough to heal it back to the way it was the day before you did that activity. And you'll get to maybe 99% the next day, and then you'll go out there and in 99 days, you'll be at maybe 40 or 50%. And at that point, you're at risk of having a permanent loss of articular function. It's going to be different than somebody who's running on turf with a football, who's, cutting and weaving through various gauntlets of hammers and clubs, which are the heads and hands of other people who are running after them. And those types of injuries are sudden and they're explosive. But it's a different process. You know, in football, you need the glycogen. You need to sustain the volume and the power that resides within the muscle that you've been training for all during off season. And the type of exercises you're going to do is more focused on challenging those joints and those muscles and the nervous system that creates power and allows you to run on turf without tearing your knees and your ankle apart, which is very difficult to do. So it's a different beast. So in terms of like pre or post game changes, I would say, well, the important post game stuff is how can you best improve circulation in your joints that have been bearing weight for, you know, a round of golf. What is it? 3 hours? Maybe
about,
4 hours?
About 4.5, and then you throw in
4.5
your warm
hours.
up and everything. You're 5.5.
And you're hanging out with your buddies and you're
Right.
talking and you're walking, you know, and you're talking, walking and torquing. I mean, you don't have to go to do deadlift, you know, to play golf, but you do have to keep your body in relatively consistent condition day in and day out, so that the proprioception of the different joints that are moving are predictable, you know. So you know how it is, like if you go and you do heavy lifting on a Sunday, I don't know, and you're really stiff the next day, then you're not going to torque and move, and your posture's not going to be the same for maybe 2 or 3 days until everything kind of gets back to normal again and you start fully healing. You know, so that means if you go play golf, your golf is going to change throughout the week. Whereas if you play pretty casually and you do work out, but it's not something that's tearing your body apart, you know, you do some treadmill, you do some spinning, or you do some, you know, moderate weightlifting and stuff like that, then it's not going to change the configuration, the tenseness of the muscles in different areas, and it will allow your body to torque the way that you would expect it to, so that your swing is predictable and reproducible, which is very important to a golfer, because that's how you criticize yourself is, I over torqued or under torqued, I swung to this way, I you know, didn't do whatever, and you make acknowledgments and you change it. And then you wake up the next day and you go, remember, I have to do that. And the body that you have is the same as the day before, so you know how to measure the changes that you want to make to the way that you swing or whatever it is, torque or whatever. You know, and in a different sport, it might be, I need to get stronger because I'm getting mowed over by these people that I'm playing against. I have to get stronger. It doesn't matter that I have less mobility. If I can stand my ground or I can do this better, then I'll get more points and I'll get better. So you feed that differently, you know. So for a guy who's playing golf, those rules are not as much of a concern, other than maybe anything that can help to improve circulation. And I don't know if it's better to say improve circulation after you're done so you can heal better, or improve circulation during, so that you're not engaging that degenerative process while you're standing on hole number 5, and you're going to be continuing that degenerative process through 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. And then you're going to be exhausted. You're going to go and sit and have a drink, which is going to be more, you know, spine sitting still and getting compressive forces and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, if there's any truth to this whole eating meat versus eating vegan or vegetarian, I would say that it sounds like eating vegetarian-based proteins is going to be a better bet, because they tend to, when you're idling, they tend to maintain your circulation open, and there's more idling in golf than there is in most other sports. So vegetarian sounds like eat before and after a good thing, but it doesn't mean that you can never have meat again. It just means that maybe now we should be more thoughtful of some opportunities for vegetarian stuff to incorporate as alternatives, and then see how much we like it, so that we can start infusing it into our regular eating habits. Because you might find some things that you really don't mind at all. And having a steak on the weekend, or, on your off days when you're probably not going to play golf, maybe that's the better way to go about it. And you can still get your, maybe over 100 grams a day to kind of just make sure you're meeting your requirements. But more than eating for golfing, I would say, be open to engaging in other activities that help to spare those joints and help to feed the rehabilitation of those joints. Yoga is really good because, a lot of the poses you're lying on the ground. You're not standing on your feet. You're doing the downward dog. Yeah, you're doing things that oppose the usual compressive forces that are traditional for people sitting in an office and people, sort of leisurely walking, and people putting torquing forces on their joints when they're swinging. So things like that. The Eldoa stuff, which, you're very familiar with, you and your work with Dan, and that stuff is really designed to, even when you're in a sitting position, you're actively trying to uproot those compressive forces and use your own body, your own internal interjoint forces to help to open those up and create more stability. Mm-hmm. And again, you're not talking to the right guy to get the right information about Eldoa. You talk to Dan about that because he knows better than I do. But a lot of that is to help to open up the usual throughput of our arteries and veins and nervous system through all the compressive interfaces of the fascia and the muscles and the folds between muscles and the folds between joints that tend to potentially get in the way of the nice flow of oxygen and nutrients in and out of the joint tissues. And that's why Eldoa and people who are practitioners of Eldoa can really bring about a lot of relief to people who have long-standing compressive force injuries in different parts of their body, including their neck and their mid and lower back and shoulders and things like that, and hips, without maybe doing surgery, which a lot of people, it's the first thing that they think about. You might not have to do it. Imagine, the possibility of learning to do some exercises that will help you to avoid getting surgery. I'm not saying that happens all the time. I'm just saying that might be before you go and go under the knife, maybe consider doing things like that. And like I said, maybe some dietary inputs might help.
That's interesting you bring that up, because obviously I've had Dan on a couple of times and he's talked a lot about the Eldoa. I've had Coach Gil Bosch, who is it's GOATA, greatest of all time athletes, that they have a program that gets the energy flow of the joints and the body movement patterns, releasing and holding that energy and then releasing it the way that they say that the body is designed. You have someone like Dr. Eric Goodman, Foundation Training, who's out in Malibu, I think he is, where he did a lot of work early in his career with the U.S. Olympic polo team, and he changed a lot of their, at least my understanding from listening to a couple of his talks, was changed their training program he reduced the amount of the weight training significantly and got into some more yoga type and stretching and positional holds that were more functional. Somewhat similar to an Eldoa, but anyone that's out there listening, I'm not trying to compare what he's doing to Eldoa, but similar in that it's taking pressure out of joints through a series of holds and or movements. And that even I got that Ben Greenfield book, and he was like, yeah, lifting weights is good a couple of times a week, but you don't have to, as far as longevity and health and life in general. But you can overdo it. You start pushing around a lot of heavy weight too often, and your telomeres can actually go down instead of increase.
And it's also important to know that, if you have a practitioner that you work with or if you read a book that's written by somebody who's a certain age, there is something to be said about the experience of people who are in your age group, being able to identify with what you're talking about. It's harder for example, if somebody writes a book about exercise who's 25 years old and you're 50, I mean, the most complaints I'll ever get are people who said, yeah, I was doing this program and I pulled my back out. And I'm like, yeah, well, it may not have been written for you. That program may not have been written for you. And I know that, nobody wants to hear that. You're getting old, but you have to understand that your body will work at a different pace than a 25-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're seeing a trainer who's, 25, 30 years old, they may not understand. I mean, they certainly will hear you if you say, I have a bad back. But if they've never experienced what it's like to have pulled, like doubled over, lying on the ground, pass me the phone, I gotta call somebody to come and pick me up and straighten my back out. That experience, it's very difficult for a trainer to understand, even if they open a book and say, oh, here's the lower back pain protocol.
Mm-hmm.
But when you deal with somebody who's gone through those things and understands that, wow, I'm starting to, now that I've had experience with this and I pulled my back too, and I've written this book, I'm realizing there's more than one type of pulled back out there. And there's more than one emotional response to the triggering that a conversation about a lower back problem has with somebody who's had that experience. And it makes you a little bit more aware of the things that really do work for these people versus the things that really don't work very well, even though they're in the book for those people. And so I do caution that, there's an experiential component to these things, and it's important to understand getting the information from a source. If it comes from somebody who, is like a superstar, Adonis like physique, that hopefully that information's coming from somebody that he's consulted with, who he's just helping to share what he learned from, who has had more experience in whatever that issue is. And I'm saying that because I'm 51. I'm 51 years old. So I'm not 70 yet. So I'm still, breaking my back a little bit more every day, trying to figure it out. But having gone through age, or whatever, you're going to figure out, okay, there is a lifestyle component to choosing protein and not choosing protein. People are more aware of the imminent concern of cardiovascular disease at 50 than they would have ever even thought about at 35. So you can talk to somebody who's 35 about heart disease and say, oh, well, heart disease is bad. You need to do A, B, and C. And, a guy who's 50 is like, screw that. Like, you don't understand what it's like to live with that specter in your life every day when you wake up, because your grandfather died at whatever age, and you're 3 years older than he was when he died. That there are more emotional elements to the idea of when you're talking about heart disease, you got some real stuff going on here. I'm feeling it now. I'm feeling it in my lower back. I'm feeling it in my knees. All this stuff that you don't really understand until you feel. And the great thing about feeling it is, I'm not saying I'm feeling all this stuff, but feeling a lot of this stuff is you do experiment with diet. Like, I know about keto diet. I know about vegan. I know about vegetarian. I know about, high carb, low fat. I know about all these traditional Pridokins and things like that. And it's interesting knowing that, I have this aging body, that I can try these different diets and I can acknowledge an improvement if I stick to a certain diet over a period of time, because I know first of all, I know how my body digests food. So I know that I have certain limitations there. And then beyond that, once that food actually gets into my blood and is on the way and ready to repair something, I can understand the difference between eating, a low carb, a high carb, high fiber, blah, 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 this, that, the other type of diet, that will have differing effects on the way that my body feels when I walk in torque and do compressive forces on my lower back, and when I try and go to the gym and lift heavy or lift light or high repetition, low repetition, do a spin class or whatever. And I think it's important to know that those rules are not fast and hard for everybody. They are conditioned upon everybody being a little bit different. And the really important part of being different is, imagine if we put the same food in everybody, and in some people, half of it comes out into the toilet, and other people, none of it comes out into the toilet. Immediately, what we're going to know from those two different groups of people is some people have a lot of trouble getting that food from their gut into their blood system, which means you're never going to be able to do the math when it comes to saying, I'm putting X calories in my mouth and I expect X calories to be available for tissues to heal or do whatever. Because that person, we know half of it's coming out in the toilet. And it could be more. It could be a little bit less, which means what do? Do we feed them twice as many calories? And then we just deal with the fact that most of it's going to come out in the toilet, but we can get the number of calories, that exact number that we need in the blood system at the right time so we can get those tissues to get the response that we want? No, it doesn't work that way, my friend. It just doesn't work that way, because the early discussion we had about things like probiotics, well, the probiotics, which are these little bacteria that live in your gut, aren't always so friendly if you feed them stuff that they're not designed to eat. And that's what happens when half of your calories are going into the toilet. They don't go into the toilet. They get mixed up with all these bacteria, and these bacteria do really funky things with those things. And that's where all the new research is coming into play is then they make those chemicals. When they eat that stuff that you can't digest, they're going to poop out these chemicals, and those get absorbed instead of the nutrients that are in those foods. Guess what has to deal with that? Your body does.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? It gets in the way of everything. And then you talk about, well, I go out and I play golf and I have these torquing and compressive forces. Well, what if we're finding out that, a lot of these undigested foods that are sitting around in your gut, just stewing there and getting gobbled up by these bacteria that live in the gut, and these compounds that they make as a result of that are getting absorbed and they're getting deposited in your joints? How are those chemicals going to affect the way that blood flows to your joints? How are those chemicals going to work with the machines to help to repair those joints when you finally finish your 18 holes and you're sitting down and you're relieving some of those compressive forces? Are they affecting your blood flow? Are they affecting the body's ability to bring collagen into those tissues and repair them? Yeah, probably yes, and probably yes. Which means it doesn't really have to do with what's on your plate in front of you. It has to do with what you can do with that food when you put it in your mouth. And then forget about the digestion. Let's imagine that you have a pre-diabetic condition, which again, look left and right. One of those guys is going to have a pre-diabetic condition. That means that even though you're getting all those nutrients in your blood, are they getting delivered to the tissues that need them to heal properly? No. You know why? Because those tissues are insulin resistant. They won't allow nutrients to get deposited into those tissues that need them the most to heal up and recover, which means you wake up the next morning and you go to play golf. And guess what? The healing that you were expecting to have done while you were sleeping the night before didn't happen. So that degenerative and torquing process gets compounded the next day. And then suddenly you're getting inflammation. You're getting swelling. And then you're taking ibuprofen or whatever. And then you're going to sleep the next night and you're going to start this whole process all over again. It just gets worse. So in terms of diet stuff, my advice for diet is get tested. Really, if you want the best advice, is find out what's broken so that you can work around it or you can fix it.
You're gonna 50%. You're gonna fix what you measure, right? And that's in everything. And if you're not measuring,
well, the hope is you get data points that are useful, so that you can say, well, that data point I'm pretty sure means this. Let's change it and give it a month or so. Let's just see how you feel. Or there's 20 data points that are off, and we have to correct all of them. It's so. What we've talked about today is that there are different types of protein, and we know that different types of protein can have different effects on the body, that they are transient. So it means that if you love your steak, it doesn't mean you can never eat steak again. I don't want to ever deny you your guilty pleasures, because the protein in that steak will still help to heal your muscles. It will still help to fix parts of your body. But for a period of time after you eat it, you may be susceptible to less blood flow. And guess what? The blood flow that you're compromising might be to the tissue that's trying to get that protein. And then there's where you're potentially compromising yourself. So occasional consumption, I think, is fine. But if you want to go through like a healing program, maybe consider swapping out and getting some interesting vegetarian sources of protein and swap those out and just see if you notice a difference. And then you'll know, I can have my steak, but maybe when I, feel like my knees are not where they need to be. Feel like my back's getting a little bit achy. Maybe I need to swap some of those things out for a little while, give my body a chance to heal because I've tried it before and it seems to help. I've tried it before and it doesn't help, so I'm going to keep eating steak, and my problem lies elsewhere. So the other thing is, if you get stuck eating the wrong types of protein, your body may have trouble digesting certain types of proteins. Like you've heard of gluten, gluten-containing foods. Gluten's a protein. It's the protein that you find in wheat. That's why people have allergies to wheat. It's because the gluten is so tough to digest. You have, people who have a real problem with cheese because casein in cheese is one of the proteins found in, different milk products and stuff. And some people are fine with it, but other people, it really doesn't work well. And my recommendation is if you eat wheat or you eat cheese, don't eat carbs with them, which is really tough for wheat because it's usually bread or cereal, or pasta. Because if you eat a carb that causes your blood sugar to shoot up too quickly, like if you eat a potato with your bread, I don't know, if you eat, pasta with your dinner or whatever, if your blood sugar shoots up too fast, it will shut the digestion down, and it particularly tends to shut down the part of your digestion that takes care of that gluten protein, that really tough to digest gluten protein. And then that's when it becomes a problem. And guess what? Most people who eat gluten, usually their blood sugar goes up real quickly. And that's one of the reasons why I think we can tie this reputation that gluten has as being a bad food is because most of the gluten that we eat is tied into pizza or pasta or bread or cereal, and they're all sugary foods.
Isn't it is it gliatin?
Yeah, gluten, gliadin.
That's a part that's in the gluten that causes a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Especially for Celtic heritage, Northern Europeans, Eastern Europeans. I was reading it has a very
sounds like me.
Yeah, me too. That they don't react very well to it. That it wreaks a lot of havoc in the system.
Yeah. So so when we're talking about carbohydrates, I would just say that we're in North America. Carbohydrates are just all around us.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of our economy. Most of the things that we grow are, in terms of grains, in terms of foods that we can preserve, store, and use later for feed materials and other things, they tend to be high carb, wheat and rice and, things that you can go and buy in bags, on the store shelf, and they'll be there 10 months from now because they'll last forever.
I before I met Dan, Justin Price was one of his students, and I had worked with Justin for a number of years. And as I was, this is 10, 15 years ago, as I was getting more into the Czech philosophy and the eating healthier, meaning removing refined carbohydrates and so on. And one day I asked him, I said, well, if it's all about not eating grains, how come that the Egyptian hieroglyphics have grains repeatedly throughout them?
You know why? Because they ate the whole grain. And that's why they had such terrible teeth.
Because they
stored the grains, and there was sand in there and stuff, and it was just not refined. It's it's a perfectly good nutrition if you eat the seeds, because the amount of work that you will have to do chewing wise to get to the goodies within the seeds,
mm-hmm.
You're going to end up eating about 20 or 30 seeds before you're full anyways. But if you have like 50 or 60 seeds in one slice of bread, and it takes you 2 seconds to chew it and swallow it, there's a relative difference there. And there's no real basis for having a discussion about it, because it's a completely different, the milling process was different. The mills were leaving grinding stone dust into the seeds. It was just not as efficient. The flour that came out of it was very different than ours. I don't even believe they were separating the husk from the actual the spermatic part of it, which is that, for lack of a better term, it's the starchy part.
Yeah, and
so they were eating whole grain bread.
Even in Weston Price's book, nutrition, physical degeneration, and
Yeah.
they had mentioned that the people that were in the Alps when he went up there, that they were eating bread. I think one of their desserts, so to speak, was cream with bread, and I had asked him about that, and he said, well, when they have the stone grinder in the middle of town and people are grinding their own wheats or grains or what have you, it's completely different than the stuff that you're getting in a store today.
It is completely different. Yeah. In a lot of different ways. In the constituents, it's different too, because when you're using a stone grinder or some kind of a mechanistic grinder that is not a steel mill grinder that we use in modern milling today, it doesn't generate anywhere near as much heat either. So all the vitamins and minerals and things like that are heat sensitive, mainly the vitamins, they generally remain intact. So that they don't need to fortify. There doesn't need to be any addition. It's just it sustains itself. The seed is pretty much what you see is what you get, kind of thing. So,
is there any bread out there now that people could buy it at a grocery store online that will be somewhat comparable to that, or at least I hate to use bad tag words, but let's say it would be a healthy bread, or is it something that somebody would have to make themselves?
Well, I would just say no to all counts, only because
I should have known better.
Because it presents it will defeat me to try and offer guidance in that area, because there's none to give. You're not going to get any good out of that, because if you're an American and you live in and amongst the foods that are available here, the problem with this is you're going to be surrounded by all these alternatives. And if you continue to make bread an essential portion of your diet, which is fine, if you like it and you want to do it, then it's fine. But the problem is, if you're seeking to remove carbohydrates to keep them at bay, any kind of bread is going to make that very challenging for you. I mean, if you grow your own wheat in the backyard and you harvest it and you grind it on your own, I mean, that who knows, could be totally different.
I don't think anybody in today's society is going to go through that process.
But it's impractical. It becomes impractical for me to say, oh, well, there's this bread. If you go to this store and it's, they put nuts in it and stuff. I mean, just go get the nuts. You know what I mean? Like, get away from, my suggestion is just get away from the whole pattern of the connection that we have to bread, if you can. Because what it will do is make you actively seek alternative ways to satisfy that part of your life with more healthy options, And I don't know offhand what those are going to be, because it could be different from one person to another. But it might mean I'm going to have eggs more than once a week instead, and I'll do that. I'm going to go buy, egg wraps at they're like these little tortilla things that are made from egg and cauliflower. Pretty amazing. And I'm going to do roll-ups for my sandwiches instead, and that'll be my way of doing it. And then you're piloting yourself into a different way of going out and shopping, when you're thinking about, okay, I got to get my lunches, I got to do this, I'm not eating bread anymore, so I got to go to aisle whatever to get my whatever alternative whatevers, and then but it's not bread, and that whole aisle, you just leave it behind, and that's the best advice I can give to anybody who grew up like I did, which is cereal and breads were an emotional staple as much as a food staple. I love peanut butter and jam sandwiches. They were easy to make. I'd make them all the time. I would just shove them down.
Oh, I had those every day for lunch.
And because they were easy, and because I couldn't afford to go eat out or anything. I was like, whatever. And it just made my life easier to know that I could, even after college, I could go get a jar of peanut butter and a jar of jam and a loaf of bread, and didn't have to worry about spending all of my rent money on whatever. So, but there's just an emotion tied to it, because my mom and my dad made peanut butter and jam sandwiches a certain way when I was a kid, and that's how I liked it. And I had an emotional connection to that because it was a comfort food. And I had an emotional connection to eating cereal in the morning because it was easy and I loved it. But I can't do that. Can't do that anymore. So the idea of finding an alternative cereal and an alternative bread to me sounds like, okay, well, I'm just circling that emotional drain there. And I'm going to end up, rewarding myself one day and going getting that, Wonder Bread and Jiffy Jam, Jiffy peanut butter. I don't know, whatever it was. And then suddenly I'm buying it every week and I'm back on that thing. So I just don't do it anymore. And I fill my cupboard with different things, and it helps to keep me away from, but I still enjoy
I have
them,
found
so.
some cereal alternatives that I think I've sent you a number of them that seem to have limited carbohydrates. And I can't remember what the number is. Maybe it's like less than 2 grams of sugar per serving. Or
Pete, would you be offended if I said, when you send me those things, I try not to even look at them because I'm afraid I might go out and buy them?
well, I use no, not
I
at
do
all.
look at a lot of those things, but there's some things like the cereal thing. I did see something coming of it, and I thought, swipe out, like just get past it, because I know if I see it,
it might trigger you to go the wrong way.
Well, the problem with cereal for me is I never eat one bowl. I'm usually on 3 bowls before I'm like, my wrist is starting to hurt. The spoon to mouth thing. Okay, I should be full by now. And then I'm like, then I'm feeling stupid because I've just broken the rule in a different way. So for me, I have to be more measured about the choices that I make, because I know that if I have an emotional attachment to a certain type of food, it doesn't mean that I'm going to cry if I don't have it kind of emotion. It's more like I have repetitive patterns attached to these things. Bowls of cereal come in 5s for me. It's just the way that I emotionally connected with eating cereal when I was growing up. I would just eat till I was full, and then I'd go off to basketball practice, and then I'd be playing basketball all day. So that connection was meaningful to me because I burn it all off.
Mm-hmm.
But as an adult, I don't play basketball 5 hours a day anymore. I just can't do it. It's I can't do that. And so that and all these other things about being a certain age and enjoying different activities and things, that I can't budget my emotional eating patterns to those things anymore. I have to adjust them and be very thoughtful. Like, it's like, when you get a puppy dog, the puppy will just keep eating. And when it's really young and growing, it's like, yeah, well, it's growing, so just keep feeding it. I want my dog to grow healthy and big and happy, or whatever.
Yeah, they're regenerating machines.
Yeah, but when they become an adult, unless you put a piece of steak in their dog bowl, they're going to only eat once a day, maybe twice, the crappy dog food that you put in their dog dish, because they don't even like it. They just eat when they're hungry. And by watching them, you kind of realize how different you are as an adult, because you have access to all these foods that you like. You don't eat naturally.
Well, I mean, as I'm approaching 50, I just turned 49, and talking to other friends who are, give or take 5 to 10 years either side, and then as we discuss things like this, I got one friend that he goes to Vegas a couple times a year, maybe more, and he used to always get the
buffet.
Well, the 20-ounce ribeye, and he said, and after a night of playing
cards, is that
cards,
in the buffet?
I don't know. Well, it depends on where you go.
Probably
Maybe
not.
it's he tends to stay at the nicer places, so I'm thinking he probably goes to some of the higher end restaurants. But he gets a 20-ounce ribeye slice and knock that back, and maybe a half a potato and then a bowl of salad.
Wow.
He said, and I think he's about 54 now, and he said, I can't get through half of it anymore.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like, yeah, we're
That's
getting
a
old,
lot.
right?
Yeah.
And that's still a lot. You get 10, 11 ounces of steak. That's
it just starts piling up. It doesn't get through. It just sits there, and
does that have a negative effect when you start, if you're eating too much, even if it's lean proteins.
Steak?
It was a
Are you
steak.
are you
Or
hoping there's a special rule for steak?
no,
Or
because
no, you just keep
I've
eating. It's
adapted
fine.
to cut mine. If I eat too much, then I just have, I don't produce enough other chemicals to digest it, and it just sits there, and my body's not. It's so conditioned
It's
now to.
pretty unlikely it's going to sit there.
Well,
But it's
I'm
not. You're not
conditioned
going
to
to see a
not.
T-bone come out when you sit up and you look at what's in the toilet bowl. You're going to see poop. You're going to see brown stuff. And that's the thing is that it's brown stuff because there are bacteria in there that will help you digest steak if you don't digest it yourself. The problem is you will pay a price for that because any organism that puts stuff in its mouth is going to poop out other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Any bacteria that helps you to digest that undigested steak is going to poop out chemicals. And those things are going to cause problems. We are starting to show it's going to take another 50 years. So most of us will be dead by the time we figure this all out, but we're figuring it out now. And I think you should pay attention because a lot of these chemicals, we're starting to see associations between those chemicals and diabetes and mortality, heart disease, dementia, all of them. And we're just going to learn more as time goes on. So what are we waiting for? The answer to your question is, what happens to the steak if you don't digest it? It doesn't just sit there. And most of us, it doesn't. Some of us, it does. I mean, if you have really bad constipation, then you'll understand that some of us do. But by the most part, most of us, it will move eventually, and it will come out the other end, but you will pay a price for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be your joints. Could be screwing up your joints. And that might be the reason why you're not 100% when you go to sleep after a long game of golf and you don't feel like you're 100% the next morning.
Well, my adaptation to that you got me on was, and I still do it to this day. And if I deviate from it too far, I can feel it almost within 10 to 30 minutes of eating, and that is.
You mean when you eat too much?
Well, not necessarily eat too much, but if I eat too much protein, it's hard for me to eat too many carbs, right? Because I'm eating salad, I'm eating the bean, that stuff fills you up or tends to feel like it fills you up relatively quickly. But if I eat more than, let's say, 4 ounces, or maybe I can push it to 5 if I was very active that day, of protein at dinner or at lunch and dinner, then I can feel that it feels like it takes, like something's sitting in my gut longer. It doesn't feel like it's moving through as quickly. If I knock it down to that 3.5 range, and I've even gone, let's say, I mean, I'll give the dog, if I have, okay, the other night I had salmon. I think the butcher cut it to 6 ounces. So I said, okay, I can have half. And I kept it to half, and between the two dogs, I gave them the other half. They get a quarter each.
Jeez, lucky dogs.
Oh, they loved it, and they couldn't believe they liked the salmon.
But I think your magic number there is 3 ounces, and I think the magic number for a lot of people is 3. And I think science, the magic number seems to be revolving around 3, maybe even plus or minus 0.2, like 20 ounces, 20 grams of protein per meal sitting is ideal. Meaning, if you were to ask yourself the question, if I put this 20 grams of protein into my body right now, are my muscles going to use all 20 of it? And the research is kind of going, yeah, I think you're dialed in on that one. And then if the number goes up to 25 grams, which is kind of closer to your, a little over 3 ounces maybe, then it's like, we might be able to get 23, 24 of those grams all packed away. They'll go where they need to go. But you're starting to move into that territory where, okay, well, now we're talking about what's in your blood at this point. We're starting to say, well, maybe 3 of those grams is going to have to go an alternative quote unquote route, which basically means it's going to go back to your liver, and your liver's going to fool around with it a little bit, see if it can make something your body needs, or if for anything else, it'll cut the protein part of that off and take the rest of it and turn it into a carb.
Yeah, I was going to say, over protein turns into carbohydrates, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's invariably going to move in that direction. So, so cautionary note is, for those guys who are into, a pound, what is it, a gram per pound? you might find that it's going to be a lot of small meals during the day to really make the use of it that you're hoping for. Otherwise, we're going to have to look 10 years from now. We're going to say, well, what will be the product in 10 years from now of perhaps 70 grams of that protein, of that 200 grams that you're eating, being completely wasted? Where's it going to go? How much of it won't be digested? That means you're creating toxins in your gut. How much of it will sit in your blood and not get used? That means you're training your liver to turn protein into carbs. Is that really what you want? You got all these kind of things that are tied up that are level 2, level 3, level 4s below the part that you see going into your mouth. You get all these levels of interaction that go on that you could be really crappy at some of those levels, and you have to find ways to compensate. And often what it means is, level 3 doesn't work for you. It's like kaput. So that means it doesn't matter how well you digest that 25 grams of protein you keep putting in your mouth. Ultimately, by the time it gets to level 3, you can only handle 15 of those grams. That means that, as a planner of diet, we have to re-educate your habits, even though your tongue and your brain says, oh, I want that one steak. I want 4 ounces of it. We're like saying, well, go ahead, but level 3 is not working, so you're going to pay for it.
Yeah, and average like, steak is 12 to 14 ounces.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to help you out here by using these more conservative numbers. But yeah, of course, if we're Americans, we're whatever, we live in North America. That's where we're going to eat steak. So unfortunately, there's a price to pay. And the problem is, if you're a guy, or I don't know why I keep talking about guys here, if you're a person who eats a food and you don't have an immediate reaction to that food, then you will never associate the long-term detriment of eating that food, because it won't be an immediate reaction. So if, like, for example, you ate ice cream and you feel really good, but then, 10 years later, you're eating ice cream and it's giving you diabetes and arthritis, it's very difficult for a lot of people to make the connection between arthritis and ice cream, because it's not like their knees hurt right after eating ice cream. It might hurt 3 days later after the ice cream's been digested and your body can't use a lot of it. You build it into fat, and then your fat cells are getting so big they're starting to, I don't know, for lack of a better term, rub against each other and create inflammation. And then guess what? You're getting inflammation, and now it's affecting your knee. But how do you make that connection? It's 4 days later. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that is the problem with food science is you can't just blatantly say, oh, well, you weigh this much, your body fat is this, you want to lose weight, we're going to put you on a high protein, low fat diet, blah, blah, blah. You need to find out more about how the body interfaces with food in order for you to say, well, actually, we're going to go put you through the process. We want you to lose weight. But high protein, low fat is not going to work for you. I'm sorry, because you are having so much trouble with your protein that we have to find a different angle to deal with this, or we have to find a way to make sure that you can process your protein so we can put you on that type of diet. And that's why you have a lot of these people coming out of these different types of, environments where there's a cookie cutter kind of diet program that everybody does, that a lot of people just say, oh, that was a waste of my money. It didn't work for me. It's like, oh, well, it's because you're unique. And we've got to figure that out.
So the keto diet's gotten a lot of publicity over the last few years. Where would that fall into the? I mean, from what I'm hearing you say, and it's because it's heavy fat, and then protein, and little to no carbs. So would that be? And it seems to be beneficial to a lot of people.
It is because if you have somebody that does a keto diet by eating lots of fat and lots of protein and low carbs, which, it's going to be one or the other. It's going to be eating a lot of protein and not turning that protein into carbs through the liver, then that can produce a keto diet. But eating fat is easy because you can't use fat in any way other than to produce ketones. Mm-hmm. There's no useful way to do it other than just storing it. So it's a good strategy for helping to get the engines that burn fat working, because it basically says to your metabolism, well, it's either feed or famine, because I'm giving you fat and that's all you can use to to burn calories because there's no carbohydrate. And what will happen is some of your tissues will go into what we call gluconeogenesis. Some of them can do that, but it's such an energy intensive process that you'll end up losing weight even if you do that. So it's a win-win situation for people who are trying to burn fat. But ultimately, keto is very good at that because, one, it opposes the normal trend of all the bad things that happen in the American diet. And that is by removing carbohydrate and its effect on the metabolism, its effect on insulin, and the effect of insulin on the sensitivity of tissues for using the calories that insulin tends to transport, which is usually carbohydrate and to a large degree protein as well, or amino acids, and to a lesser degree to fat. But if you take insulin out of the equation by removing carbohydrates, you reverse all of the processes that insulin kind of adopts to create fat and put on weight, which is really good. Mm-hmm. Is it healthy for you? Is it unhealthy? We keep getting these reports coming out saying, well, keto isn't healthy for you because it makes you more insulin resistant. It should do that, but it's not a bad thing. And I don't know how to explain it without going into too much detail, but I'll try and do it in one sentence. Insulin resistance is different than high blood sugar. There are two different things that happen to be associated with each other. They are combined when you talk about diabetes. And every wrongness that medicine has done over the last couple generations about diabetes and diet has been attached to misnomers associated with the effect of carbohydrate on insulin. And what a lot of doctors have been doing who've written books about ketogenic diet or Atkins diet and things like that have been trying to educate people to say, don't get too attached to these terms because they mean different things under different circumstances. Insulin resistance, when you don't have any carbohydrate coming into your pie hole, means a very different thing than when you're eating carbohydrates every day. It means a very different thing. Insulin resistance basically means that the tissue is no longer making it easy for carbohydrate to make admission into the tissue. But when you're not eating carbohydrate, that issue doesn't matter. And actually, it's a very constructive process for when you're on a high-fat diet, because if you create more insulin resistance when you're on a high-fat diet, fat will still get burnt. Fat will still come out of the tissue to get used as energy. But it's just the way the tissues are reacting to the fact that there's no carbohydrate to work with. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a different environment so that they can keep the glycogen levels in the tissue as relatively close to where they want them to be. And that means that there's a certain degree of gluconeogenesis, which means that there's a certain degree of activity within the cells to try and make their own carbohydrates. And when they do that, it tends to reverse the flow of activity of carbohydrates from coming in from outside of the cell to being produced within the cell. And that naturally is going to create what we call a state of insulin resistance, even when people aren't eating carbohydrates. But all these studies are coming out saying, oh, well, it's encouraging diabetes because it's encouraging insulin resistance. But they're leaving out the most important part, which is, but we're not eating any carbohydrates. So insulin resistance, when you're not eating carbohydrate, is a perfectly viable adaptation of a tissue to its current environment, which actually is an encouraging sign that it's going through this adaptation very successfully and doing what you want it to do. So, it's just, and this is all for those of us who are in the medical community. This is all basic science, basic physiology, basic biochemistry, stuff that we learned and we all got all of our high scores in because, of course, medical doctors are geniuses, right? They're always the guys who scored highest on their tests when they're in elementary and high school. That's why they got into med school. But the problem is the processing element of this information. You can memorize all the data on the planet, but if you cannot process it, you're no more useful than somebody who struggled to learn how to read. And that is the problem with this community at this time, is there's a real departure from understanding the science, understanding the pharmacology, understanding all these different types of sciences that are involved in the human body, and integrate them into practical understanding of what they mean under certain circumstances. And this whole discussion we've had for the last couple of generations about, diabetes, and it's not sugar, it's triglycerides and cholesterol, and you're eating too many eggs and cheese, whatever. It's just the amount of effort that these studies have tried to manipulate data to try and give us an idea of what's going on, when in fact it's just a bad science on top of bad data, trying to find creative ways to express this, to send the message that they're trying to convince the public to continue to follow the recommendations of your, take your metformin, and, continue to eat your cornflakes and, your glass of your skim milk in the morning, and all these really stupid ideas that are harming people, not helping them. When in fact, what we need to do is always be willing to break the chains that tie us to these theories by furthering the integration of practical common sense information and seeing how it applies through research. And we can reinterpret a lot of the research that's saying, don't do ketogenic diets, by saying, oh, you're wrong. Do ketogenic diet for these reasons, because the data actually is, the output of the data is actually encouraging to us, not discouraging. So, the same can be said about, things like cholesterol, and, there are just a lot of these data points that seem to chain us to this idea that all these things are bad, when in fact they are essential to life.
Well, yeah, it's like even the
in
cholesterol.
animals.
When LDL cholesterol is up, and by up I mean let's say anywhere from 200 to 260, as far as today's standards are. But if inflammation markers are significantly low, it's like, is that higher cholesterol really a bad thing?
And the answer is a tentative no. The fact is, the interventions that we've taken through diet for, again, we're going to go back a couple generations, haven't changed statistically the outcomes, the mortality, and the severity of heart attacks for individuals who've chosen to continue to eat the way that they want to eat, as opposed to those who've made real efforts to change their diets, to remove cholesterol, to remove animal proteins, to remove cheese and butter, and replace it with vegetable oil-based alternatives. This was what we've been doing. This is what we continue to do, because nobody's come along to say, we have definitive proof that A, this doesn't work, and B, this actually is counterproductive, and here's another way. This is what we want you to do, and the government's backing us. There's just not there. Because I think just there hasn't been enough information to say that another diet is better, and that may be perhaps due to the fact that we haven't poured the same quality and continuity of research into those alternatives that we have into, getting data from people who tried doing the eat margarine instead of butter, and eat fish instead of beef, and eat less animal fat and more vegetable fats. Has shown even limited data, but enough limited data for people to say, oh, well, it moved the dial, and you have a 1 in 200 chance of living longer on this diet as opposed to, the other standard American diet. So let's do that. Yeah, well, that's kind of like gambling to me. And until it's not gambling, I'm not going to do it.
Most of the eating, and as we talked about early on, that it is particular to each individual, but for the most part, a large thing that is a goal, I guess I
lower
could say.
Carbs.
Well, yeah, lower carbs, but
Huge.
to reduce the inflammatory response within the entire bodily system. In particular, I mean, as we talk about golf, because it's just slow, repetitive.
I don't know about that. There's a lot of what we think are common sense assumptions to make about limiting inflammation. Inflammation is really important, and inflammation should be happening on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, inflammation is bad when it gets out of control. Imagine this. Imagine looking at your clock. You wake up at 7 a.m. You go to bed at 10 o'clock at night. And in that space of time, you have the morning, you have lunchtime and afternoon, you have the evening, and then you go to sleep. And let's just say that the morning hours when you're most awake are when you don't want to produce inflammation. So, and that's when you, let's say that's when you do all your physical work. You're a farmer, digging through hay and milking cows. I don't know, whatever it is you do, driving tractors and stuff. And then you have your lunch, and then the afternoon is kind of a slowly switching over time. You're still doing work, but your body's starting to switch over, because by about 5 or 6 in the evening, you're going to be going into relaxation mode. You're going to have your dinner, and you're going to relax, and then you're going to eventually go to bed. Most of your inflammation, you might hope would happen between 6 p.m. and maybe midnight, because most of that time you're not physically working. So you're not, if you're inflamed, you're not going to feel, oh, I can't work. I got to take the day off. I can't earn my pay. You're going to be like, oh, I feel like crap, but I can, going to go to my lazy boy and watch a movie or whatever. You can do that. So, having that rotation is really good if you have all your inflammation between, 6 p.m. and 12 midnight. And then part of that, you're sleeping through it. So that's awesome. And then by the next morning, you're not inflamed anymore. Now, so that's how you want your body to work. Inflammation is like a bunch of brooms. Okay, so your immune system is ramping up the broom production at dinner time, so that when you're relaxed later in the evening, these brooms can go out and clean up all the mess you made from the day before. And the hope is by midnight, that cleaning's been done, the floor is clean, and all the bare spots that have kind of been injured have now been cleaned up. And then what can happen is while you're sleeping, growth hormone and your immune system go in there and deposit new fresh tissue and lay it out, so that the next morning you come and the hallway's nice and clean and it's all buffed and everybody's slipping and sliding all over the floor because it's so clean. And that's the way you want it to be. That's kind of the way you want it to be. So you don't want inflammation happening in the morning, because that theoretically means then you didn't clean up enough. And the cleaners have been working all night, and the floor is just like completely bare now and needs to be relaid. New tiles need to be put on. You need to put a buff of, put a clear coat on it. And that's going to ruin the whole day, because nobody's going to be able to walk on the floor that day. That's not what you want. So inflammation is a good thing. It's just when the conditions in your lifestyle disincentivize your body from turning it off when it needs to be turned off and turning it on when it needs to be turned on, then you're going to suffer ill repair. And then the next day, your body's not going to work as well, or you're going to have to be walking on that floor that's got that clear coat on it. Now that clear coat's stuck to your shoes. You don't want to be baling hay and milking cows and driving tractors, with paint stuck to your ass. That's not inflammation. That's not a practical use of inflammation for you. Because, it's gross. It's stuck to your butt, your underwear is stuck to it, and you're walking around and it's drying all over the place, and you stink, and it's just not practical. That's the whole thing about inflammation, is it has its place. It should be cleared out at a certain time. And yes, there are foods that the whole idea of encouraging inflammation is this discrepancy between the fats you eat that are more inflammatory and the other fats that are anti-inflammatory. That's just a small part of the equation. But we've indoctrinated that as the whole part of the conversation for the last 20 or 30 years now, because of, the invention of flaxseed oil and blackcurrant oil and all these omega-6 and omega-3 oils become so popular. Really, they became popular as a marketing concept that went behind the sale of oil extracts that had become very popular in the 90s. And then people were so proud that they understood the thromboxane pathway and the lycotriene pathway and all that stuff, that they were like, oh, I'm so smart. I know all about inflammation. You do, a part of it, but there's a whole bunch of other events that are involved in that process that we don't even look at, because we thought we finished that discussion 30 years ago. It's still an unfinished discussion, because there are other parts that contribute to that, the circadian hormone rhythms and things like that, like cortisol and testosterone and progesterone and growth hormone and all these different hormones that help to mediate the flow and ebb, the timing of inflammation. We have obesity and all of the intervening signals that are partly involved in the leukotrienes and the thromboxanes. And that's why things like Tylenol and Celebrex and things like that have always worked so well, because they interrupt that part of that piece. But that piece is the pinnacle of a whole bunch of metabolic underpinnings that express those pathways. And it's not just that we're deficient in fish oil or that we, whatever, some other thing, omega-6 and omega-3 ratios and things like that. It has to do with all of the things that set off the process to begin with that are somewhat controlled by a balance of different fats. But that's really more of a marketing influence on that theoretical pathway than it is a practical application of that pathway. There are other underpinnings that are more important. Like I said, hormones are really important, but being obese, having cells that are packed full of nutrients that are insulin resistant, that are not comfortable in the environment that they're being shoved into, that are creating physical forces that are rubbing against their neighboring cells, but also biochemical forces that are reacting to the insulin resistance and the other different factors like blood flow changes as you get older. And when I talk about blood flow, I talked about blood flow. God, we've been talking for almost 2 hours now. About an hour ago, we talked about what if your knee doesn't have enough blood flow and you're walking around on a golf course, degenerative force right there. Because, and I'm not saying that because you've been standing for an hour playing golf and torquing and twisting, that only 10% of the blood that should be going through your lower back is going through there now. I'm talking about maybe 87 or 88% instead of 96 or 97%. That small change is enough to create degenerative forces and to induce, when the immune system goes in there to try and repair it, if there's not enough oxygen for the immune system cells that are in there trying to repair it, what happens is those cells will change their activity and create more inflammation. And all that stuff will have nothing to do with the thromboxane and leukotriene pathways and getting those all set up. Even if you're deficient, that pathway will still continue to be inflamed if you have immune cells that go in there with their brooms and don't have enough oxygen to work with. They'll die in there. And when they die in there, they'll spill all their contents in there. And instead of cleaning things up, they'll burn more holes in the floor. And then you'll wake up the next morning and again, your floor won't be finished and you'll get, whatever we talked about, all that bad stuff. So layers and layers and layers of stuff. So really important is, what are the things that I can do to help to maintain my circulation when I'm 40 years and older? Because the golf pro that's 25 years old would never have even thought of those things, because he can go out there and play golf literally 24 hours a day, beer drunk and walking on his hands and spitting golf balls, and be able to wake up the next day after 24 hours straight and do it all over again.
Right.
And you at 50, forget that. You can play a couple hours, you come home, and if you don't concentrate on staying awake, you might just fall asleep right in front of the TV before you even turn it on. So there's just a different thing. And that's because of how the whole system of delivering blood changes as you get older. And a lot of the work that you have to do as you get older have to be conscious of how you can manipulate that. And it's work that you don't want to do. It'll be stuff that you don't want to do. Trust me. If if you're a male and you can identify with what I just said, you'll totally understand. If you're female, you might not, because women tend to be in better cardiovascular shape than most men at the same age. They have a bit more of an advantage. Most women do. They'll go do yoga and love it. And guys will be sitting in there like crying in the corner trying to do it, because it's just not, we're not built to do that. It's just not good. And cardiovascular stuff, I may be being a bit sexist here, but I think women generally have better potential to do aerobic activity at a moderate pace that is better for golfers than most men do. And most men hate doing it, but it's what you got to do. So, because it will keep your circulation going.
So inflammation has its role. It's the chronic inflammation
Yeah.
from all the shit that we've been talking about when you get.
When you can't turn it off.
Yeah.
But that it won't be diet that will be the main force there. Well, no, that's not fair. Diet will potentially be a force that will affect circulation. And I believe that ultimately limits in circulation to tissues that have undergone the most wear and tear and have the most scar tissue, which will be that old injury that you had from that knee thing that happened when you were in high school. It'll be from sitting in your chair all day and then going and playing golf all day and just grinding and grinding on your lower back. There's going to be years worth of scar tissue in there. And where there's scar tissue, you're going to have trouble getting blood through there. It won't be 100% blood flow. It'll be low 90s. And that'll be enough to, it's not like you're putting cholesterol in your mouth and it's causing inflammation. You may be putting cholesterol in your mouth along with the pizza that you're eating, because that's where the cheese is, and causing blood sugar stuff. And that will cause damage to your circulatory system, and that will further the degenerative forces. And guess what? Guys eat worse than women do. Guys eat more crap than women do. Guys eat larger volumes of crap than most women do. And why do guys have heart disease? Well, we shovel more food in our mouths than most women do. It's probably because we grew up wanting to be bigger, so we could impress some girl we wanted to, go on a date with.
It's just cycle, isn't it?
All these, stupid things that we learned when we were. For me, I was probably competing with my brother. He was eating off my plate when he was done his plate, and it pissed me off. So, I keep shoveling it in faster to keep up with, whatever. But I was also a skinny kid, and I know what I was thinking of when I was an adolescent. I was thinking about girls, and I was thinking about wanting to be better, whatever. And I was skinny, so I ate more, and I ate a lot, and I got used to it. And as an adult, my capacity for eating is, on a 24-hour, it's pretty much, I've never met anybody who can eat as much as I can if I put my mind to it. But I can't do that anymore. Paid a price for it.
I used to be like that with baked goods and sweets. I mean, when people, I would sit there and eat half of a pie or cake or the whole thing, and people would say, doesn't that make you feel sick? I had no idea what they were talking about. I did not ever experience an insulin rush until I cleaned up my diet in my mid to late 30s.
Tried it again.
And then when I would try to do that, then I would, oh man, I really feel like shit.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I started to make the adjustments that I realized how much or how bad it was. And now if I do it, like I told you earlier, if I can have a couple cookies after dinner. If I have one or two more, it's like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. No. I got to ask you one more thing, because we've been going for quite a while, and I don't want to take. I want you to come back. I want you to have enjoyed enough to come back, and I'll keep you too long. You're not going to do that. One of the genesis that when I reached out to you some time ago to come back on again was I was seeing a lot of things on social media about with people I follow, and that has to do with water intake. And we touched on this the last time you were on. But I mean, there's so much out there, and most of it revolves around either drink half of your body weight in ounces or drink the 8-ounce glasses a day. And you and I have had enough discussions that said that it's just not true, or it's not backed by anything, any hard data. And especially for a sport like golf, where people are outside quite a bit. And so I think giving them some direction. I mean, if you're outside and it's 95 degrees, yes, you're going to have to drink a lot of water.
Yeah.
But this time of year, we're moderate temperature, 75 to 77.
Yeah, well, there's nothing like somebody who has a really good experience with something and wants to tell everybody. I really think that tends to be where a lot of these health staples come from, is, somebody drinking a lot of water and feeling better. And there are people out there who drink a lot of water and feel better. So I can't argue with somebody who says, well, I feel better. I'm like, okay, well, I can't argue with you. But when somebody asks me, like, point blank, does everybody need to drink more water? I can't help but think, okay, well, what's the practical reason for this? Like, how in human evolution would this have made sense? I mean, you could go far enough back and say, well, we used to be fish. And I'd be like, well, I guess I can't argue against that. It's true. But if we kind of look at the trail of evolution in the last maybe million of years or so, yeah, you could say that most civilizations thrived close to water, but it's not because they were standing next to the water with glasses in their hand, socializing all day next to the water tank. They weren't drinking all day. They drank when they were thirsty. And I think there's something more valuable than saying, well, somebody said that they feel better when they drink lots of water, so I want to try it. I'm like, hey, try it out. See how you feel. Go for it. But in terms of reasoning, I would say it's better to reason that the body kind of knows how much water it needs. The disadvantage of getting everybody to drink water is the other half of the pendulum are going to be people that don't hold on to the water the same way that the people who drink a lot of water and feel really good do. And what happens is those individuals that tend to pee a lot of water out that they drink, they might think, well, I'm cleaning my kidneys out. This is really good. But what I might also say is you're peeing out all the minerals that your body is trying to hold on to too, though. It won't happen after 1 or 2 glasses of water, but maybe after the 6th or 7th glass of water, you might find that you're not feeling as good because while your body is trying to figure out how to balance all of this water equation that you're putting into it, it has to exchange something to get something to happen. So that water that leaks out of you, some of it has to be brought back in and other has to be left over. And what happens is you may be losing more minerals than you're putting in when you're drinking that water trying to make yourself feel better. And over the long term, that is a detriment. So I don't ever recommend water drinking as a therapy for patients unless there's a specific reason to suggest it. And those reasons are very specific. And so by and large, my impulse is to say, no, I think that's crap.
Yeah,
I say that only because there's so many reasons for you not to do that.
Well, as I look at my own, where we found I had issues with my gut with the limited hydrochloric acid that it was producing or wasn't producing. Obviously, I was, as a kid growing up, as we discussed, you have an affinity for carbohydrates. That was probably a large part. The other part was I used to drink a ton of water. Now, whether that was because I was playing pro golf and I was out in the heat all day, or I was just, it was all over the place, 15 to 20 years ago, it was like, I think that reached its peak. Every trainer, every therapist, everybody was telling you drink more water. And, I'd sit there and drink. And then even drinking a lot of water when you're eating dinner, I as far as some of the things I've read say, that could be a problem if you have an acid deficiency. Because that's all that's going to do is wash the acid out, and it's not going to digest the food properly. So yeah, as I've reduced water consumption, I've actually felt better. Now I have tended to go the other way, where I'll start to cramp up a little bit, and it's like, okay, you better start drinking some more. Yeah. But I've also been doing saunas 3 days a week.
And the interesting thing is when you say drinking water makes you cramp up less, maybe it's helping to increase your blood volume, which is allowing blood to flow to those areas that cramp so that you're not getting cramping. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, that may be a benefit, but it also may just be saying, okay, well, rather than pumping more water into your system, we need to find a way to dilate those arteries a little bit more so that they can allow more blood flow to go through those tissues to allow to clear them out more, so that they don't, and to bring more nutrition to them so that they don't cramp so much. And then that again, then it's not a water issue anymore. It's a vasodilation, vasocontraction, vasoconstriction issue. And that's more of a mechanistic thing that is coincidentally helped short term by drinking more water. But, I just say, my word of thumb is, drink when you're thirsty, and maybe have lots of water available if you're going to be stuck in sweltering hot weather. I mean, that's just common sense.
Well, where I started cramping up, and you go hiking 6 miles in one day up and down mountains, 1.5 miles each way, and
there you go.
You don't drink enough, and then you're sitting on the sofa that night, and all of a sudden your hamstring just locks up on you. It's like, hey, you're supposed to drink
after you had that big steak.
No, I kept it limited. I've learned my lessons the hard way. Not as often anymore, but I still learn them. Yeah. It is always a pleasure.
Yeah, I hope that we answered some. I know it. I never give direct answer to questions, and I know that some people don't like hearing, "Oh, well, it's complicated," but it is sometimes. And individuality is important. And I think a good doctor who really loves their craft wants to learn more about how to treat individuals rather than just put up their sign and say, "Weight loss here," and just set up a conveyor belt.
Well, as I said, I think that the technology has shown in across the spectrum of fields in today's world that we knew we were all different going back some time ago, but that you do need specialization because the healthcare system, the way it is, at least in this country, is broken. It's not working, and people are not getting healthy. They're following the protocols and getting worse. So yes, it is coming down to specialization and what is each individual's recipe, and not only that, but what is the recipe going forward? Because the body and you are going to adapt. You're going to change. Age, eating better, eating cleaner, all these things is going to change you. And then how does that adapt with as your body ages over time? And they have to get with somebody like you to constantly, not constantly meaning monthly, but yearly, do your testing and find out exactly what you need. So yeah, it is very important. It is complicated, and that's why someone should call someone like you, or they can call Dan or myself to get in touch with you. If they want to, if they really want to find out specifically how they're different, and as we all are, then that's the thing that you need to do if you want to be healthy, and if you want to age gracefully.
Yeah, if you're somebody who really wants to know why you're doing stuff, that's important to.
But before it becomes a problem.
Because you're going to be learning some stuff, and some people are like, just give me the pill. And that's just a personal choice, but most of the people that I see they're well aware enough through referrals like yourself and Dan that there's a story that we're gonna tell a story. It's not just gonna be take this pill and call me in a week. That's part of how it is to learn, is to learn about yourself, is to get information and see how it fits.
Well, usually at the end of shows, I ask everybody where they're talking or how people can follow you on social media, get a hold of you, look at your website. But I know that
I don't do anything.
That you don't do anything.
I don't.
So if somebody does want to get a hold of you, that y'all can do it through me, through the website. Yeah. All the info's in there. You can email me, text me, whatever. Yeah. I'll get you in touch with Doc, and he'll get you right, as he does with so many. It's been a pleasure, Doc. I look forward to catching up with you again when those tests come in, and
we'll let you know.
Keep getting me on the better health path.
You gotcha.
Great. You have a wonderful night.
Yeah, you too.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you enjoyed it, you can find more information on today's episode and other topics at golf360.blog. There you'll find the show notes and links related to this episode, as well as any other episode that we've done so far to date. If you're interested in improving your game and would like to learn more from yours truly by taking a private lesson, a half-day or multi-day school, club or putter fitting, you can reach me through the blog site or by email, pete@golf360.blog. So some of you may be asking, what is the golf paradigm? All you have to do is click on the homepage while on my blog site to discover how you can start playing better than you ever thought possible. Or you can simply sign up, again, on the blog page for my instructional videos where I give regular tips on all areas of the game to include the swing, club design and fitting, health, fitness and nutrition, the mental aspects, and equally as important, the integration of all those things together. I'm also on social media, and you can find me at The Golf Paradigm. That's PARADIGM, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, also under the same name, The Golf Paradigm. Facebook is usually the best way to reach me for questions and or comments, and I look forward to hearing what all of you have to say. This podcast is brought to you in part by Old South Golf Links. A short ride across a bridge from Hilton Head Island is one of the area's finest golf courses and a hidden treasure.
set up on towering pines and ancient oaks with sweeping marsh vistas, truly makes Old South Golf Links a one-of-a-kind golfing experience. The Clyde Johnson design was named one of the top 10 new public courses when it opened, and it also takes full advantage of the natural beauty of the Lowcountry. Old South is a fun and unique challenge for golfers of every skill level and a favorite of both locals and visitors. Whether it's your first time here or you're a regular, you'll be treated and feel like family. From the bag drop to check-in at the fully stocked pro shop with both men's and women's apparel, to breakfast or lunch before or after your round, the staff is always ready and willing to help. Experience for yourself why Old South is one of the premier golf courses in the Hilton Head area and why it will quickly become a favorite of yours too. Visit them in person or online at www.oldsouthgolf.com, or to make it tee time, simply call the pro shop at 843-785-5353.